Taming the Rock Star, Rock Candy, Series Book 2, by Virna De Paul, narrated by Christina Renault. Chapter 1. Tucker. Life sucks, at least that was how I felt at the moment. And I was a rock star, only I was the band's drummer, the Ringo to our band's Paul. That meant in the end I was pretty much filler, and the fact that I even thought that, when I knew I was one of the luckiest men on the planet, made me an ungrateful jerk. I had money, women, and fame, all the things a guy could want. And I was still pissed my best friend Liam Collier, lead singer of Point Break, had decided to risk everything for a girl. I'd been tight with Liam for years. Together we'd started the band in a basement. We weren't good enough at the time for garages. And it had been our baby for 7 years. Now we're one of the hottest bands around, but thanks to Liam, that might not be true for long. We just completed an encore show at Madison Square Garden, finishing the North American leg of our first world tour, and now it was over before it had barely begun. And all because Liam was in love. Earlier in the tour, he'd rekindled his fiery passion with Abby, the band's backup cellist. But it wasn't until a few weeks ago that he dropped the bomb, wanting to postpone the international leg of the tour, to think things over, but mostly to spend time with Abby here in New York. Me, I was headed back to Southern California, even though I had no idea what I was going to do there. Our future was really up to Liam. If he decided after a few months of R&R with Abby that he was done with the rocker lifestyle, then I wasn't sure that Point Break could go on without him. Sure, we could get a new frontman. We could change the band's name and rebuild everything from scratch. But it wouldn't be the same. It wouldn't be as fun. Chances were it wouldn't be as successful. I was 23, a high school dropout, and I could beat a mean lick on drums, just like a billion other dudes on the Sunset Strip. Without the draw that was Liam and his songwriting skills, I was afraid we might be cooked. As if all that wasn't enough, now I was stuck in a huge line checking in my luggage for my evening flight. It was a pain to be stuck in a line a mile long any time, but especially when I was nursing a hangover. And I'll admit, I was always nursing a hangover. Admittedly, the first-class line I was in was way shorter than the coach lines, but still. Too bad that even as huge as Point Break was, we weren't huge enough to have our own private jet. Not yet. If Liam pulled it together, who knew? But for now, nothing beat the fun of looming unemployment, like being stuck in line with cranky people while praying no one recognized me. I loved our fans, I truly did, but I was tired. I just wanted to get on the plane, order a drink, and go to sleep. 20 minutes later, as I reached the front of the line, I had to admit Lady Luck was at least throwing me one small bone. At the check-in counter to my right, I just spotted a woman that was very easy on the eyes. Tall, I'm about 6 feet, and she looked to be about the same. She had curves that went on for days, and a mane of curly red hair. I couldn't see her face from where she was talking to the desk staff, but somehow I knew it was epic. Tapping my foot and pretending to play with my smartphone, there are incognito ways to check out babes, and guys who can't just aren't trying hard enough. I took a good long look at her, then gulped at the boots she wore. I was going to have to scratch that she's tall theory. Nope, she just had massive boots. They weren't chunky or army style. They had 6 or 7 inch heels. They were made of red leather and laced up the back. They forced her onto her toes like those fancy ballet shoes. It was some extreme footwear, but the girl owned it and moved as fluidly as if she were wearing sneakers. She was getting more interesting by the second. The woman finished her business. She was just about to walk past me when I accidentally stepped forward and bumped into her. "Whoa," I said, reaching out to steady her, even though she didn't really need steadying. "Sorry, I didn't even see you," she said, removing huge bug-eyed sunglasses from her face. It should be a crime for women with blue eyes that gorgeous, that much like a crystal mountain lake, to keep them covered. Her face was pale with a perfect Cupid's bow mouth and thick red-lined lips. She wasn't just a 10, she was off the charts at all angles. "Well, it's hard to see in the dark," I said, smirking down at her feet. "Nice boots." "These aren't even my A-game," she mused, winking at me. "Gotta go," she said. She slipped her glasses back on and walked away, presumably headed to the security line. I rushed through my own check-in as fast as I could, and double-timed it over to the spot next to her in security, And yes, that involved apologetic smiles and cutting to get there. She was talking in French to someone on the phone, or at least that's what it sounded like. Don't quote me on it. All I know about French comes from a few Pepe Le Pew cartoons. I wish she was still available to flirt with, but I settled for watching her. I wondered what her story was. Clearly she had some fashionista taste in footwear, and she was very polished. She was a man-eater if I'd ever met one. Still, that didn't answer the big questions like who she was or whether I had a chance with her. She finished up her conversation and juggled through her purse, taking out her wallet and, hello, a passport. Obviously, she wasn't heading toward LAX and the sunny beaches of the City of Angels. She finished going through TSA, even that machine that shows off everything, and I was also rabidly jealous of whomever was reading the scanner. Any extra glimpses of her would be appreciated. As she rushed to whatever far-flung locale she was headed for, though, she dropped a piece of paper. She didn't notice and started pounding down the tarmac toward the gate. She took the turn toward the international terminals, so at least my Sherlock deductions over her passport had been accurate. I made my own small talk with the agents, shoved my phone and tablet into the tray, and took off my shoes. As I was reaching down to slip off my left boot, I made sure to discreetly sweep up the paper the redhead had dropped. It was her baggage ticket, but before I could read it, a now familiar squeal caught my attention. "Oh my God, it's Tucker Benning!" someone screamed. I groaned inwardly. As much as I loved the fans, and as scared as I was that it wouldn't be like this for much longer given Liam's love connection, this was not the time. I had a hot honey to track down and didn't need the Tiger Beat Brigade slowing down my game. Still, this came with the job and the territory. Turning around, I gave the three girls wearing Point Break concert shirts the biggest megawatt smile I could. Looked like they'd come to New York for our big and possibly last show at Madison Square Garden. The tallest girl looked Hispanic with long brown hair and big brown eyes. Her friends were shorter. One was blonde and the other a brunette with braces. They were probably no older than 15. "Hey, did you come see our show?" The three of them looked at each other and burst out giggling. I tried not to recoil at the amazing pitch and frequency. I'd built up a tolerance over the years in screeching amphitheaters, but standing only 5 feet from it is an in-your-face experience. "Can you take some quick pictures with us? We tagged this on Instagram and everyone's going to be following us," the tall girl added. "Yeah, this is going to make everyone back in Illinois so jealous." The braces girl, her words whistled a bit through the metal as she talked, clapped her hands. I nodded and kept my smile planted tight. It was always on time, always another chance for good PR. In this world of tweets and instant media, you couldn't afford to be rude to any fans, or it'd be on the news in under an hour. Besides, it was just polite. Sometimes I'd ask for privacy if I was out eating with friends or something, but my flight wasn't coming up soon, and they were nice enough kids. Offering up a trademark smirk, I wrapped my arms around the girls and posed for selfies. Predictably, we attracted attention, and I had to pose to take other pictures. Then the questions started. "When is your next album? What's your favorite song to play? Did you ever want to sing?" I played nice for a few minutes, and eventually the crowd dispersed, leaving me with my 3 teenage fans. Then Tall Girl asked a question that bit right into me. "So," she asked, pushing a thick braid behind her ear, "is Liam Collier here too? He's so cute. It was so adorable how he ended the concert on stage with him and the cello girl." My smile fell, and the girls seemed to notice my change in mood as they got quieter and more reserved, too. "He's not. He's taken some hiatus time, but I'll let him know the fans are thinking about him, if he gets his head out of his love nest long enough to answer some texts." "That's good," the blonde replied, then eyed her cell phone. "We have to go or we'll totally miss our flight. Thanks so much." "No prob," I said, glad they scattered once the big Liam question came up. I had to stop thinking about Liam's actions as betrayal or the end of the band. He couldn't help who he fell for, and Abby was good for him. I was happy to see my bud happy, but I just wanted my band to be standing at the end of it. That didn't seem like too much to ask, did it? Flipping over the baggage claim ticket was enough of a distraction for me. Some lucky lady was flying to Charles de Gaulle. Paris. Nice. I'd been there once, years ago, and I'd always wanted to go back. So the insane thought hit me. Why not? It would be a crazy thing to do, but a little crazy was exactly what I needed at the moment. It's not like I had plans. I had loads of money thanks to what Point Break had been raking in the last few years. If I wanted to divert to Constantinople or Tokyo for a few weeks, I could. That settled it. I was booking my fine self back to the counters, buying a first-class ticket, and rerouting my luggage. I had the money, I had the time, and I had one amazing woman to track down. The beauty of the setup at LGA was that the first-class lounge for international flights was swank and spacious. I was pretty sure I'd find her there. Her clothes, especially her couture boots, screamed she was definitely not a coach kind of girl. I almost patted myself on the back when I found her sitting in a leather seat and sipping pre-flight champagne. She was thumbing through her phone, and I wondered if she was the workaholic type or just bored and playing a game. I was going to find out. Tucker Benning, intrepid explorer, was so me, especially if it was the digits or address of a lovely lady I was looking for. I coughed to get her attention. She looked up and frowned back at me. "Hi, I'm Tucker Benning, and you're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." She arched an eyebrow, and her frown melted into a small smile. "Are you stalking me?" "No way," I answered, hoping I was playing it all off as well as I wanted to. "I've got a friend in Paris." Well, I could make one anyway, so not that big a lie. Groupies were everywhere. Besides, I'd always wanted to check out Morrison's grave. Paris would be a kick. "However did you manage to drop your baggage ticket, Dominique Lorenz?" I held it out to her, and she took it with a huge sigh of relief. "You just saved my life. You have no idea how big a favor you did me. Not that I necessarily need the ticket, but you can never be too sure. I'm carting precious cargo, and I really need this to go off smoothly. Come on, sit. You're like my white knight in leather and cut-off sleeves." I laughed. It maybe just a little flexed my biceps to accentuate the tribal tattoo on my arm. It seemed to drive women crazy. The blush on Dominique's face told me right off that she wasn't immune to my charms. I've never been called anyone's white knight before. It was true, and I found I liked the moniker. She nodded. "Well, I've rarely been called Dominique. That's what Mom calls me. I've never liked it. I've been Nikki since I was a kid," she said. She extended her hand and I shook it, just barely refraining from kissing her knuckles. I couldn't be that predictable. "So, Tucker, what's your story?" Chapter 2. Nikki. I wasn't quite sure what to make of the rocker wannabe in front of me. He was cute, that much was true. Not overly tall, just an average 6 feet, with a sleek build and the most piercing green eyes I'd ever seen, like emeralds sparkling in the sun. He had torn jeans, thick motorcycle boots with loose laces, and a leather vest over a white tank top. The series of ink spirals on his left bicep could be one of those "I was super drunk and the tattoo artist said it was cool" mistakes. Looking at him, the kid couldn't be more than 22, far too young for me. Granted, I was only about to hit 27, but when you were trying to build an international brand and working to design runway shows and open stores, well, 22 and tatted up seemed even younger than it already was. Still, he was trying very hard, coming up to me with his swagger and bluster set on 11. "Nikki, huh, I like that," he said, and when he smiled it highlighted his eye teeth, making me think of fangs in the most intriguing Dracula kind of way. It was charming, but the rocker type wasn't my thing anymore. At least that was what I kept telling myself, even as heat flared through me. "Well, Tucker's not so bad." He laughed. "That's not a ringing endorsement there either, princess. So, Nikki, first tell me what you do, then tell me how you walk in those boots." I blushed. My shoes had been the talk of Fashion Week in Milan last year, and I was making a name for myself apart from my mother, Anna Lorenz, and her fashion magazine empire over at Lifestyle. I was on my way to becoming a couture shoe fashion maven, and I was thrilled. Only I knew I was gaming the system. The more outrageous and impractical the designs at fashion shows, the more critics, and that included my mom, loved them. The boots I was wearing now would be perfect if the heel was an inch lower, but it was that extra inch that took them from fabulous to extraordinary. They were a prototype for what I'd be headlining in Paris, but they were uncomfortable to walk in, and the only thing that kept me from falling when I wore them was the fact that I'd taken years of ballet. But they were extreme, and extreme sold, even if it wasn't exactly what fulfilled. Someday, however, once I'd made a big enough name for myself, I'd get back to designing shoes with a better balance of flair and function. My mental musing had obviously gone on too long because Tucker suddenly looked uncertain. Did I say something wrong? I've been on the road, and I've seen a lot of group women in platform boots or pleather numbers. But I've never seen anything like yours. I'm amazed you don't fall right over. I sighed and stuffed my phone in my purse. I designed them, actually. He grinned and hunched down while leaning back. Tell me more, because I'm impressed. I'm impressed you could take up the whole row, but you stopped to chat with me, so you go first. You were talking about being on the road. You're in a band, right? He frowned back at me. I told you my name. You've really never heard of me? Well, no, Tucker Benning, right? Oh, wait, Tucker? I slapped my forehead with my palm. You're the drummer for Point Break. Are you going to squeal now and ask for selfies? Because I got that from the 15-year-olds at the security check, and you seem too cool a chick for that, he teased. I shook my head and tried to keep myself from blushing. It was a flaw I'd always had, some part of my fair French heritage. I dated some of the trust fund set of Manhattan and had flings with minor B-list movie stars. I wasn't starstruck, even if Point Break was one of the biggest bands out there today. But I did feel dumb for not recognizing him. He'd seemed familiar, but I supposed I deserved a break. I'd been putting in 90-hour weeks to prepare for the show and was practically seeing pink elephants. Well, I can't be that cool since I didn't figure out who you were sooner. Actually, you get extra points for that. It's been a while since I met a person who didn't know me. Besides, I'm sitting next to a bona fide designer, and I didn't even know that. Yeah, you must have missed my music videos and my cover of Rolling Stone. I don't know. I'm sure some designers have done those things. You know a lot of designers? Honestly, I probably wouldn't recognize Calvin Klein if he punched me. So you see, the life of a rock star, not all that glamorous. Right. Well, make that double for shoe designers. I have my first Paris show coming up, and I can't even remember what day it is. I'm like a cobbler in a fairy tale, just making things for weeks and hoping someone likes my shoes. It is still July, right? For about 5 more days, sure, he replied. So, if you know who we are, do you have a favorite song? Save Me, I said, thinking about the first time I'd heard the ballad. I'd had a huge fight with my mother, so what else was new? But this had been a doozy when I'd announced I was opening my store in New York. She had been on me since I graduated from the Fashion Institute to work with her on editorials. It was the first time she truly realized that no amount of threats or cajoling would get me to live my life the way she wanted. She'd cut me off, thrown me out, and I'd been holed up in a small rat trap apartment in the village, paid for with the small inheritance I'd had from my dad, and eating ice cream. Then I'd heard Save Me play, and I'd been lost in its haunting cello score. It had offered me solace when nothing else had. Now my mom and I were on speaking terms again. She was showing interest in my designs, even if most of the time that interest was critical. Really, most people still name the bigger songs. I shook my head and traced my fingers over the pendant I wore, which my dad had given me for my 21st birthday before he died suddenly of a heart attack. For me, the combination of rock with strings is so amazing. I don't know, it just transports me every time I hear it, even if it's just for 5 minutes. He pulled at his lips, suddenly looking depressed. That was a rapid mood change. I wondered what I'd said to make him close down on me. What's going on? He hesitated. Confidentially? Wide-eyed, I nodded. We're not sure when we'll be back touring. We had to put the current one, our first world tour, mind you, on hold because Liam, our lead singer, is in this massive honeymoon period with our cellist Abby. I mean, I'm happy for him. I've never seen him this gone for anyone ever. But at the same time, there are 4 of us in the band, and we have lives and bills too. It's like someone cut my tightrope and I'm free-falling. Hence the trip to Europe, I offered, reeling for him. It would be terrible if all of a sudden your job— No, I could tell playing drums wasn't just a job for Tucker. It was his identity, was ripped out from under you. Besides, I was sure that like trust fund kids or designers, rock stars got used to all the perks and comforts of that fast and luxurious lifestyle. If he had to start pinching pennies again, it was going to be a rude awakening. Maybe clearing your head isn't the worst idea. You're right, but I've got an even better idea brewing in my mind, Nikki. He added, What did you have in mind? The flight isn't boarding for over an hour. Plus there's a private family bathroom nearby. Not at all what a classy woman like you deserves, but I promise to more than make up for it. I smirked back at him, and the fire that had already been burning so bright inside me grew to a raging inferno. I'd like to see that very much, Tucker. Show me what a rock star can do. Chapter 3. Tucker. Nikki had seemed perfectly willing to sneak off with me for some fun, but as soon as we'd sat down again in the first-class lounge, she'd muttered something about having to work and had buried her head in her open laptop. I was surprised how disappointed I'd been about her change in attitude, but I decided to cut her some slack. For all her sass, maybe she was normally more restrained than she'd let on. I slumped down in my chair and surfed on my phone. Based on when our flight left and the time difference, we'd be arriving in Paris around 9 a.m. Maybe Nikki and I could grab a quick breakfast before getting back to getting to know one another better. When they finally started boarding our plane, Nikki took the lead with me, following close behind. Even though I was also in first class, chances were someone else had the seat next to Nikki, but at the front of the first-class section, Nikki turned to me and, not quite able to meet my eyes, said, Have a good flight, Tucker. No. No way I was not sitting by her. But I just nodded and said, See you, Nikki, struggling to hide my smile when she looked equal parts surprised and disappointed. Poor woman was really all kinds of thrown by what had happened between us. While she took her window seat at the front, I took an aisle seat a few rows back, immediately jumping back up again when a woman paused next to Nikki's row. Excuse me, ma'am, I flashed my pearly whites. I'm just a couple of seats back. I was wondering, would you mind terribly if we switched places? You see, Nikki and I have business to discuss. The woman looked startled, then looked down at Nikki, then looked back at me. She turned to Nikki. Is that okay with you? I held my breath at the tense silence that ensued, relaxing only when Nikki said, Sure, if you don't mind, that would be great. The woman smiled. Then no problem. You two have fun. Thank you very much, I said before plopping into the seat next to Nikki. I didn't look at her, however. Instead, I got my headphones out, plugged them in, stuck the buds in my ears, got comfortable, and closed my eyes. I could feel her gaze on me and wanted to look at her so bad, but part of me was annoyed, and not just at her. I wasn't one to chase after a woman who didn't want me. Then again, Nikki was interested in me. I just had to figure out what caused her to back off. But I could do that after we took off. The next thing I knew, I heard the flight attendant offering someone in front of me a cocktail. Obviously, I'd slept through takeoff, and we were now at cruising altitude. Figuring I'd given Nikki a sufficient taste of her own medicine, I opened my eyes and cursed. She was curled against the window with her eyes closed. Her lips were slightly open. She was snoring softly, and her red hair was in messy curls around her face. She looked adorable, even more so when she mumbled something in her sleep. Narrowing my eyes, I leaned in closer, almost certain I'd heard her say my name, but not sure if I just imagined it. A minute later, it came. Tucker. It was just the wispiest of sounds, but it hit me like a punch in the gut. I stared at her for a few minutes. With a sigh, I closed my eyes, again settling myself into my chair. But this time I splayed my legs out a bit so that my leg lightly brushed against one of hers. With that comforting connection, I drifted asleep again. 6 hours into our 7-hour flight, I woke up barely able to believe it. Obviously, I'd been more wasted by playing on the road than I'd thought. What was even more unbelievable, Nikki was still dead to the world. Once again, I found myself just staring at her. What was it about her that had me so intrigued? Yeah, she was gorgeous, and before she'd clammed up, she seemed like she knew how to have fun. But that wasn't something new for me. Rock groupies are women who excel at the fine art of partying, but that usually comes with a lot of shrieking, and let's face it, not a whole lot of challenge. Plus, I never really knew what I was getting with a groupie. I'd spent more time than I cared to admit fishing lost hair extensions out of my couch cushions or the bunks in my trailer. I'd spent even more time having to shake women who wrongly concluded we had some kind of future. But that wasn't Nikki. The woman was confident, snarky, and sexy, but she was also pure class. Even when I wanted to spend more time with her once we arrived in the City of Lights. But I also wasn't going to keep putting myself out there. If she wasn't interested in seeing more of me, I wasn't going to push it. 30 minutes later, the pilot asked the flight crew to prepare for landing. People started talking and shifting about, but Nikki still didn't move. Frowning, I reached out and gently shook her arm, thinking she hadn't been kidding when she referred to herself as a cobbler, working on her shoe designs all night. The girl had obviously been running herself ragged. "Nikki," I said softly. She moaned and pouted, then blinked her eyes open. When she saw me gazing at her, she smiled and said, "Hi." I couldn't help smiling back at her. "The plane's landing, princess." She blinked a couple more times, then sat up. "I actually slept through the whole flight. I'm so sorry." I shrugged. "It's okay. You obviously needed the sleep. I guess things will keep you hopping once we arrive, huh?" I waited, wondering if she'd say something about us getting together after the plane landed. "I haven't been sleeping much with 18-hour workdays," she said. "I'm lucky I remember that I'm headed on a plane for Paris, let alone your name, Tommy." I felt like I'd been kicked. Okay, so she'd gotten weird afterward, but we had an awesome time before that. At least she seemed to like it. Seriously, I was Tucker Benning. I normally left girls begging for more. The fact that Nikki had forgotten my name was... "What's the matter, Tucker? Cat got your tongue?" I narrowed my eyes at her as I processed her smile. "You set me up." "Not nice." She nodded as she gathered up her purse and laptop case. "Yeah, but it was pretty priceless. I bet you have girls fawning all over you. 'Oh, Tucker, you're the best I've ever had,' and 'Oh, Tucker, just kiss me one more time.' Sorry, but I'm not the type to fawn." I raised a brow. "Yeah, I think I got that when you ignored me." She stared at me wide-eyed, and we remained silent through the smooth landing. When it was time to disembark, I stood. "So, princess, are you the type who likes cream in her coffee and extra crepes?" I asked as we made our way into the line. Getting off a plane always reminds me of a zombie apocalypse, everyone out of it and shuffling along. It's the worst. Still, it gave me a few more minutes with Nikki. "Why?" she asked. "I want to imagine what you're having for breakfast in the morning, because it doesn't look like I'm going to be there, am I?" She licked her lips and hesitated. Her eyes flickered with something hot before resignation settled in. "I'm sorry, Tucker. It was fun meeting you, but no, I don't think breakfast is a good idea." I nodded and shrugged, even though everything inside me was screaming a denial and urging me to change her mind. "It was fun meeting you too, Nikki," I said. "Good luck at your show." Before long, we were off the plane and in the airport terminal. I hung back and Nikki walked ahead of me, though her stride didn't seem as smooth as it had been in New York. The boots must be getting to her. I watched her go, hoping that she'd stop and glance at me, maybe even change her mind and come back, but she didn't. Soon she disappeared from sight. Go after her, that something inside me urged once again. But no, it wasn't worth it. She wasn't worth it. Guys like Liam Collier got to ride off into the sunset with his true love Abby. He'd always believed he'd find the girl of his dreams, have 2.5 kids, and drive a minivan. Guys like me, that's not what I wanted. I was a rock star who liked women and booze and partying hard. Even if my best friend had gone soft, it didn't mean I had to. I had the cash to stay at a fancy 5-star hotel by the Seine, but it seemed excessive given it was just me, and I probably wouldn't be staying in Paris very long now that my reason for being there was gone. Thank you, Nikki. Besides, staying at big hotels reminded me of how many I'd trashed back in the day. I can shove a TV out of a 5th-story suite like no one alive. Keith Richards once complimented me on my aim, come to think of it. But while I didn't exactly regret those memories, I'd have given them all up to spend more time with Nikki. Since that wasn't going to happen, I just needed something simple to tide me over until I headed back to L.A. After checking into a small hotel, I walked the streets a bit. When I returned, I headed down to the cafe next door. I sat over some croissants and awesome cheese. Smelled like a foot, but tasted oddly great. And before I knew it, was Googling Dominique Lorenz. I was annoyed that she was still on my mind, but that didn't stop me from doing it. I hit the mother lode, finding article after article that made me think Nikki just might be an even bigger partier than I was. But those were all several years old. The more recent hits were all about her designs, shoes even more extreme than the ones she'd been wearing on the plane. Most had staggeringly tall heels that led to those exaggerated points, and they came in a riot of colors and materials, including ones that seemed to be made from bamboo. Hadn't the girl ever heard of sneakers? Of course, if she had, she would just put them on a 12-inch platform and dare women not to fall down and break their necks. I found an article mentioning her upcoming fashion show in 2 weeks, but learned she was also opening her own boutique. Neither of those were small feats, and I found myself feeling a surge of pride for her. Point Break was on indefinite vacation, and I had nothing to do. Maybe I'd catch her show. I'd light up Twitter just by sitting in the front row, and I could only imagine how thankful Nikki would be. Then I'd see her shop. More free publicity. I'd be doing her a favor, right? Wrong. After the way we'd parted, I didn't want to cross the line from persistent to stalker, something I was quite familiar with since I've had girls literally hide out in my trash can before. Any lingering desire I had to see her again was just about hurt pride. Some immature need to prove to myself and her why girls normally lined up for a shot at me. Yeah, well, she couldn't walk away from you fast enough, could she, Tuck? I muttered. Actually, I didn't walk so much as run. A husky alto rang out behind me. I recognized her voice immediately, but I stifled my instincts to turn around and look at her. Leaning back in my chair, I set my hands behind my head. It's no problem, Princess. I was just curious why is all. It's not like I really care, you know. I threw the comment out there because I wanted to see how she'd reply. She didn't say anything at first, and I tensed, wondering if she'd walked away. But then she said, "Maybe not, but I'm finding I care, Tucker. Hence the reason I ran in the first place, and the reason I followed you to see where you were staying. I would have eventually stopped, but it turned out we were going in the same direction. It's whacked, but I'm staying at a place a few blocks from here." I heard the click of her footsteps, and then she was in my line of sight. She paused next to the seat across from me. "May I?" I nodded, and she sat down, crossing her long legs. She'd exchanged her boots for turquoise shoes that somehow managed to resemble a 5-point star. Unlike her smoking hot boots, the shoes seemed to tip the scale from edgy to wacky. Just because something had never been done before didn't necessarily make it a good idea. Still, she was gorgeous enough to pull it off. She'd changed into tight jeans and a low-cut, silky black top. Despite my best intentions, all I could muster was a sulky, "Why the change of heart, Nikki? Look, I know how I acted after we, in the bathroom, was crazy. But I guess I just panicked a little. I have a lot riding on this trip, and you've got distraction written all over you. I saw you arrive here, headed to my friend's apartment, then—" She looked at me almost helplessly, but I wasn't letting her off the hook that easy. "Then what?" She rolled her eyes. "Then I missed you, okay? We barely know each other, but all I kept thinking was I was here, and you were here, so close. I mean, what were the chances that you'd be in a hotel so close to me? And I just want to spend more time with you." I smirked, even as I felt a little amazed, but mostly thankful that the fates had led me to the hotel, and more importantly prodded Nikki to follow me and return. "Yeah," I said, sounding far more casual than I felt. "Time with me or time with certain parts of me." She sat forward and very deliberately licked her lips. "My friend who owns the apartment where I'm staying said I could have other friends over." "Is your friend who owns the apartment hot?" Nikki laughed. "Oh, you'll see." I studied her, wondering what game she was up to now. My life was finally looking up since Liam had announced his unexpected vacation. I smirked back at Nikki and offered her my hand. "Well, honey, you've definitely said the magic words. Lead me to paradise." The apartment wasn't anything like I'd been expecting. It was decorated with clean lines and sleek glass furniture and littered with magazines like Men's Health and Cigar Aficionado. It was becoming less and less likely that a cute blonde was going to waltz out of the other bedroom and fall into my waiting lap. Slumping down onto the sofa, I picked up a copy of Men's Bodybuilding magazine and tossed it to her. "You set me up." She laughed, and I was beginning to both hate and love that sound. Nikki was clearly part devil, part temptress. "Claude is an old friend from when I was a kid. He's in the fashion industry, does designer men's socks." "That's a thing?" "Yeah, that and ties. It's the only thing that has any originality in the corporate world," she replied. "I don't get it either." I laughed and gestured to the shoes she'd discarded on the floor. Yes, extreme fashion trends are very hard to understand. Admit it, though. You played me. Here I was thinking you had a friend as hot as you are and that things were really going to get interesting. But I come back here and it's like the ultimate rich bachelor pad. Well, if you're kind of the snobby type. True, she said, giggling. I tangled my hands in her hair and just took in her amazing face. She grinned, then kissed me. Taking that detour in LaGuardia, best decision of my life. Chapter 4. Nikki. Tucker reached over and brought the fresh strawberry to my mouth. We were having lunch out on Claude's balcony. The view was as breathtaking as always. From where we sat, enjoying fruit, crepes, and fresh-cured meats, we could see the expanse of the Parisian skyline, which included Notre Dame and the Eiffel Tower, as well as other buildings and landmarks that were so famous around the world. Around us, cars honked and birds sang. Paris liked to think of itself as more refined, but it was a metropolitan city like any other. Today, in the middle of the week, people were rushing to and from work. It was a living, breathing being around us, and I loved listening to its heartbeat. "What you thinking about?" Tucker asked. I was thinking about how much fun I was having with Tucker, while at the same time pushing back thoughts that I was crazy, that I should be working preparing for my show, including all the smaller events leading up to it. But I had to do something to release all my pent-up stress, didn't I? I loved the six-pack abs and the broad expanse of his chest. I now knew that he had several other tattoos, including one over his left hip, a bright orange tiger leaping from crimson flames. Tucker Benning couldn't be more rock and roll if he tried. Nothing like living the cliché, but I knew a lot about that. I'd lived it too, hadn't I? I'd been a typical celebutante through most of my teens and too much of my early 20s. A predictable poor little rich girl, partying hard and blowing money. First, to hide the fact all I wanted was my mommy's approval, something I was likely never going to get. Second, to drown out the knowledge that I'd likely driven my father to an early grave. I'd since put all that wildness behind me. Was being here with Tucker, hooking up with a rock star, and an especially notorious one at that, the start of my downward spiral into self-destruction? "Seriously, Miss Lorenz, why are you so upset?" Tucker said. I blinked back at him, but those green eyes were sphinx-like, giving up very little. "My mom's Anna Lorenz," I said, as if that would make any sense to him. Of course it didn't, but for me it was truth, and it was my burden to carry. "Yeah, so?" "She's the editor for the biggest fashion magazine in the States. I mean, I get it if it's not your standard reading material." "Well, I prefer Rolling Stone or Maxim. I'm not going to pretend to be more pretentious than I am, Princess." I liked that about Tucker. He was who he was. I pretended to have that same easy confidence, but that's all it was, an act. Anyway, I guess you could say I grew up with all the fashion stuff. I was always drawn to it because it was Mom's life. It definitely helped me get interested, and yes, I'd be lying if my name didn't give me my first leg up. But I need to make it on my own now, prove I can be more than just my mom's shadow. "I don't know why you're worried," he said. "You are one of the most gorgeous, powerful, and amazing women I've ever met." I blushed and looked away. I didn't believe in compliments. I wanted to believe in them, and I wanted to get used to receiving them, but that was just a pipe dream. Nikki Lorenz had been a joke and a tabloid punchline for far too long. There were late-night hosts who had earned second homes by making jokes about me. All my fault, of course. The last thing I felt was amazing or powerful. Most of the time I felt like a small boat in the middle of a tsunami, still afloat but just barely, and any wave at any moment could send me crashing to the ocean floor. Just like my mother no doubt expected. "I'm not that amazing," I said, pulling the comforter around me. "I'm flattered you think so." "I meant what I said," Tucker said, clenching his jaw. "You're a force of nature. I see it in how you can pull off shoes that should leave you in traction. I see it in how you have a store opening in Paris, and you're not even 30 yet. So Google gives out my age now? Perfect. Stop trying to derail me. I'm serious here. Being amazing at life is about passion, and trust me, you're a passionate woman, Nick. There's really something special about you, and I knew that before we ever even met." "Wow. Okay. Well, you don't really know me, not the real me, and you don't know what you're talking about." I hadn't meant to sound so harsh, but his words were weakening my protective walls even more than he already had. Soon they'd shatter into dust and I'd be left utterly defenseless. I couldn't let that happen. Still, it was hard to see him hunch down on himself and frown at my words. I'd wounded him when he was just trying to be kind, but I couldn't make myself believe what he was saying. Not after all the times I'd embarrassed myself and my parents. Not after all the times Mom had raked me over the coals for being such an utter and total disappointment. It's just so hard when you have to live in someone's shadow, I said, with one last lame attempt to explain. He snorted. No kidding. What's that mean? It means I know exactly how you feel, Nikki. Really? You're like the rock star out there. There's no band hotter than Point Break. He rolled his eyes. Assuming that might be true for the moment, it won't be true for long. We're about to be on a very long hiatus. Kids have short memories. They'll find the next hot band next month, and we'll start back at the bottom. Either way, I'm not the rock star out there, and I never have been. Huh? Liam Collier's the band's frontman, the singer. He's the one the fans love most. Oh, right. You mentioned Liam earlier. So you hate him? Tucker flinched back. What? No. Liam's my best friend. But it was my idea to start the band in high school in the first place. And at the time, I was a much better drummer than Liam was a singer. He couldn't even read notes when I first got the idea. Not saying Liam didn't learn fast, or that he's not amazing now. But I wanted this from the beginning. I wanted it so much. But he's part of the band. He's the one girls go after the most. He's the one that the media covers twice as much. I love my best friend. I do. But he casts about as big a shadow as the Empire State Building. That's exactly how I feel about my mom, I exclaimed. Yeah, well, don't look too happy about it, will you? For a moment I froze, but when he laughed and pulled me in closer, I breathed a sigh of relief. For the first time in a long time, I felt like someone got me. I mean, really got me. Maybe Tucker did know what it was like to always feel like you had to measure up to someone else's legacy. It was this impossible hamster wheel of trying to catch someone else's star. But knowing that you never would, no matter how hard or how fast you ran. Does Liam know how you feel? I asked. Probably not. How about your mom? I shrugged, and he shook me a little. Keep talking to me. Tell me how you feel about it. Why you feel you can't measure up to her. It's just always been that way. Everyone goes to my shows, and they don't just expect new or different. They expect the best. It's like they all think Mom started giving me fashion lessons in the womb, and God forbid I design anything that isn't outrageous and innovative. I like fun and flair, but I like combining that with function. I like that challenge, that restraint. But there's always this part in the back of my mind, this voice telling me, they're not going to like it, or they're going to ask what my mom thinks of it, or they're going to think they're boring. You're boring. Tucker squeezed my shoulders tightly to his chest. So that's why your designs are so extreme. Because then there's no chance anyone can say you or they are boring. I shrugged. The only designs my mom even comes close to complimenting are the more outrageous designs. But your mom has never designed anything, has she? She critiques, sure, but that's like music critics too, you know? It's easy to tear something down, but it's hard and scary to put your own stuff out there. You do. You do it every day, and you need to get credit for that. No points for trying, only succeeding. Words courtesy of Mom, and I've always been an utter disappointment to her. Tucker kissed my cheek. Then this is the part that I don't get, I guess. I mean, Liam and I compete, but I'd do anything for him. You make it sound like your mom is basically Satan in heels. In some ways she is, I said, and then laughed. I wanted him to think I was joking, even if the pressure from her was overwhelming. But geez, talk about a downer. Enough about Mommy Dearest issues. You mentioned reading about my new boutique, Chez Lorenz, is celebrating its grand opening tonight. It's almost 1 and I have so much to do before 8. He pulled back and frowned down at me. I looked up at him and tried not to flinch under the scrutiny of those moss-green eyes. Are you trying to give me the bum's rush? Yes, because I feel like I've poured my heart out to you and I just want to keep doing it. I was in damage control mode, but I didn't want him to know that. No, but I need a serious shower. Then I have to get things ready for the party. I stood, as did he. I mock-sniffed his armpit. You can use a serious shower yourself, mister. If that's an invitation. It's not. Go get showered back at your place and put on something nice. Nice? Why would I do that? So you can be my +1 at the opening. I could tell that he was surprised, that he'd been expecting me to blow him off. Maybe that would be the smart thing to do. He had a way of making me feel as amazing as he said I was, and I could definitely use that boost of confidence tonight. I just had to remember that Tucker was a temporary fix. I could enjoy the heck out of him for a short time, but anything more than that, and I'd get addicted to him, and it would only be a matter of time before I crashed and burned. Leaning up on tiptoe, I gave him a huge kiss, gratified when he took it to another level. Somehow I managed to pull back. "I'm sorry, I really do have to get ready. There's so much to do, and if I take any more time, I'll be stressed. Maybe afterward." I bit my lip. He grinned and tapped the end of my nose. "No maybe about it. Afterward is going to definitely happen, and I can't wait." I breathed a sigh of relief. He seemed to want me as much as I wanted him. He was also going to be a good sport and let me do my business before he did me. "Give me your phone," I said. He did, and we exchanged numbers. Feeling almost giddy, I gave him another quick kiss. "I'll see you there." I watched him walk out the door, feeling happier than I'd felt in a long time. Once he was gone, however, the more time passed, the more I started stressing about the opening, and the more I felt like a puppet that had been cut from its strings. I returned to the balcony, hoping to recapture the feelings of contentment I'd felt with Tucker, but they escaped me. I sat back heavily in one of the heavy iron chairs on the balcony, suddenly plagued by insecurities and fear, worrying not only about the opening tonight, but about the upcoming show as well. Tucker had said I was amazing, passionate, but he barely knew me. I designed shoes I loved, shoes that spoke to me deeply, but I also pushed the envelope beyond where my instincts told me to stop. As a result, everything in my line consisted of shoes no sane person would walk in if they wanted to keep normal feeling and circulation in their toes. High fashion didn't cater to sane, everyday people. It catered to designers and hipsters looking for something different. But in the end, what was the use of garnering accolades for your creativity when no one actually ever wore your stuff in the real world? I suddenly craved a drink. Finding Claude's stash, I poured myself a shot of Jack. The burn of the liquid down my throat grounded me, but also brought back memories of my partying days that I didn't want to revisit. I'd never been out of control when it came to alcohol. A little had always gone a long way, giving me just enough of an edge. But I'd been extreme in other ways, dancing, streaking, even fighting. It wasn't the numbness of alcohol I'd always craved, but a heady combination of electric energy that told me that I was alive, combined with the free fall afterward that made me calmer, able to handle anything life threw my way. It was that kind of adrenaline rush and subsequent letdown that wiped my mind clean, when my heart was pumping so hard I couldn't notice anything else, even the echoes of my mother's doubt and disdain. Without even knowing it, Tucker's words on the balcony had attempted to do the same thing, but now that he was gone, they were ephemeral. How could I recapture what I'd felt when he told me how amazing I was? There on the balcony, a terrible thought occurred to me. I fought it, but I felt like I was falling apart at the seams. The stakes were so high, and I just needed to get into that Zen place where I knew everything would be okay. I'd done it before. I stepped up to the balcony railing and gripped it, the smooth metal warm from the sun. My heart was pumping wildly in my chest, but my breaths were even. Before I could second-guess myself any more than I had, I boosted myself up until I was sitting on the railing, my legs dangling over the edge. Then I carefully stood, balancing on my bare feet. I raised my hands out wide and arched back my neck. All of Paris was spread out below me, my new kingdom ripe for the taking. The wind was blowing just slightly, and I enjoyed the feel of it on my face for several seconds before my knees wobbled underneath me. I almost pitched forward and terror zipped through me, but at the last moment I fell back and into a waiting chair. I sat there panting and wrapped my arms around my knees. Tears were hot on my cheeks, but I tried to ignore them. I knew I should tell someone what I'd done and ask for help. The first person I thought of telling was Tucker. Tucker, who thought I was amazing, and thought he knew what I was going through because he envied his best friend's role as leader of the band. But no, that could never happen. No one needed to know that Nikki Lorenz, hot new shoe designer of the moment, was falling apart. No one needed to know my secret, least of all Tucker Benning. Chapter 5. Tucker. I didn't know about shoes. I mean, yeah, I liked a high heel on a hot babe as much as the next guy. I'd never been a fan of girls into combat boots, and I didn't get why women could wear those sexy pumps, then they'd go around in ballet flats. But mostly, I didn't think about it much. As for me personally, I have some sneakers for if I want to hit the gym, when the record label makes me before publicity shoots, and a few nice shoes for award shows. But I don't know the names of the different styles, and taking them off is usually a huge relief at the end of a fancy night out. Mostly, I wear motorcycle boots everywhere. Tonight being a rare exception. Tonight, I was wearing dress shoes with a pair of designer jeans and a white button-down, trying to look nice for Nikki's show. So basically, I was probably the last guy on earth to be able to tell if shoes were awesome or not. What I did know was that shoes displayed in Nikki's Chez Lorenz were unlike anything I'd ever seen, even when I'd Googled her. Again, that might not be saying much. If I'd been the type of guy who wanted to design someday, then maybe I'd have a lot more ideas about footwear. Clearly, Nikki had gotten a license with whoever made that pink Japanese cat thing. She had some heels with pink crystals all over them and that cat's face on the side. Cute, flirty, and a little fun. But that was the most normal shoe there. There was a pair of heels that were at least 8 inches high, but the shoe part looked like someone had glued a ballet flat to a spike. I wasn't sure you were supposed to walk in them. If some poor girl tried, she might snap an ankle. Still, they looked incredible. Then there were shoes I could barely describe. Tons of heels at least 6 inches high with rhinestones and Swarovski crystals added, but they also had those same toes that looked like point shoes. Then there were these things that reminded me of architectural designs, wild geometric patterns that really were more art than shoe. Among them were these gray and turquoise numbers that were made of different cuts of triangular fabric. They looked like the world's weirdest trophies. They didn't have heels coming out of the back, but seemed to sit on platforms coming out of the middle of the shoe. In other words, if you didn't have amazing balance, like tightrope walker phenomenal, you shouldn't try a Nikki Lorenz special. Again, I knew next to nothing about shoes, but I was an artist too. I knew enough to know when someone was pushing the boundaries of what people had done before. Nikki hadn't pushed boundaries. Nope. She'd pole vaulted over them, and that was amazing. As I sipped my complimentary champagne in one of those alcoves of her new shop, Chez Lorenz, I tried to be patient, but was plain antsy to tell her how much I admired her. I made another lap around the boutique, and finally maneuvered my way through the crowd. It took a lot of quick turns and snaking around other people, but I managed. It was times like these I wish I'd paid attention to French in high school. I didn't even know the word for sorry, and as I got glares from most of the models and design community, I figured a quick "my bad" in the native language might have soothed things over more. Finally, I saw Nikki. She had a sleek black dress that hugged every curve, a thick diamond necklace around her throat, and heels that she clearly designed herself that had to be close to 7 inches and covered in gold leaf. Her eyes were highlighted by smoky eyeshadow and rimmed with kohl, and I could have lost myself here in this moment just staring at her. She had to be under a lot of stress. I had a small inclination from her weird rant earlier how much she needed to impress her mom so that the feared Anna Lorenz wouldn't insult her. Mothers with poison pens? Ouch. However, she looked cool and calm, if a bit removed from everything around her. Reaching out, I placed a hand on her shoulder. She startled and almost dropped her drink on the marble tile below. Then she smiled, and she literally took my breath away. I leaned over and kissed her cheek. I was just coming over to offer some support. You did an amazing job. These shoes should be in a gallery. I mean, come on. They're like works of art. Thank you. That's kind of you to say. She said it automatically, as if she was used to blowing off compliments about her work, and I frowned. Before I could say anything, however, her eyes darted around the room, and I realized she was looking for someone. When I took a step back, figuring I should give her some space, her gaze met mine. She licked her lips, and regret filled her beautiful eyes. I'm sorry for being distracted, Tucker. I just have a lot more people to talk to. Divine is supposed to be here as well as William Cooper. I was hoping they'd come as a show of fellow support. A bright light flashed, temporarily blinding me. Blinking, I got my bearings and noticed the photographer in the corner. She was clicking fast and furious, and I'd become accustomed to red carpets and even trying to eat out at lunch with my friends and having 1,000 lights go off in my face. It was annoying, but it was the trade-off for being famous. I looked back at Nikki to see if I could do anything to help her out, to relieve the pressure of the crowd, until the other designers got here, or she felt she could take a break. She wasn't paying attention to me, though. Her gaze was fixed on the short blonde woman with the huge Nikon around her neck. Nikki balled her hands up at her sides and glared at the photog, and if looks could kill. "Can you not do that right now?" she snapped, moving past me and standing nose to nose with the photographer. The blonde huffed and set her camera aside so that it hung from a strap over her chest. "You know your mother is so much more accommodating for the press. I shouldn't be surprised. You're nothing like her. She's pure class. You're not. Even your ex-boyfriend saw that, which is why it didn't take long for him to leave you." "Hey," I began, jolted out of my malaise, just as Nikki's hand shot out. The slap rang out hard and fast. Despite everything, it left my jaw on the floor. I knew from Google that Nikki had provided fodder for tabloid stories the same way other heiresses had, and okay, even certain rock bands that had trashed a hotel in Memphis. Still, she was older and a successful designer now, and our little dance aside, she hadn't given me a glimpse of that wild, impetuous nature. "Say that again," Nikki snarled. She would have lunged for the blonde again if an older man, one with a thick salt and pepper mustache, hadn't held her back. He took control of the situation, barking out something terse and commanding in French. Then security was dragging the photographer, who was rubbing her slightly swollen cheek, out the door. No one said anything for a very long time, and I was surrounded by a room full of oppressive silence, with all of us looking at Nikki as the older man led her away. A man beside me in a suit that had red pinstripes just shook his head and leaned into my ear. "Is that your date? You'd best run," he whispered theatrically. "Huh?" "You heard me, guy. I'm trying to be nice. Nikki Lorenz can barely go 5 minutes without making a scene. This is the same stunt she always pulls." Still stunned and not sure what to say, I pushed past him and started toward Nikki. But the older guy with the graying mustache, the one who had held her back from doing more damage to her reputation, led her toward a room in the back. The dude was good size, probably about 6'3" or 6'4", and broad-shouldered. He looked like he was the head of security, but the way he had his hand on the back of her shoulders, I wasn't sure. That could be a more intimate gesture, and I was scared that it was. Besides, the guy was staring at me like he wanted to do the lunging and tackle me. Whatever. After he and Nikki disappeared, I decided to hang back and wait for her. She appeared 10 minutes later, all fake smiles as she worked the room. In every other direction but mine, that is. I gave her 20 minutes of this, then walked up to her as she was talking to the mustache guy. "Hey, Nikki, are you okay?" She turned toward me with another smile, but wouldn't look me in the eyes. Yeah, I'm fine, Tucker. Look, I'm sorry, but I have a lot of important people to talk to. Thanks for coming, but we can catch up some other time, okay?" She finally looked at me when she asked the question, and as I stared at her, I saw nothing of the warm and passionate woman she'd been in New York and her friend Claude's apartment. "Nikki," I began, my words cutting off when Gray Mustache put his arm around her waist. And instead of pulling away, she leaned into him, in front of me, and it was clear by her words that she'd forgotten our plans for afterward. There is too much drama here. I didn't know who this Nikki was, but I didn't like her. She was clearly in her element, sucking up to her sycophantic fashion zombies, and with that incredible Hulk guy beside her. I didn't need to be treated like some kicked puppy or piece of garbage she wasn't interested in. Disgusted, I gave her and the annoying dude one last look and took off. I was in the most romantic city in the world. I could do better than this. I went back to my hotel room, changed, then headed out. I wasn't religious. I mean, yeah, I'd been raised Christian and still celebrated Christmas with my family, but that was more about connecting with loved ones and, let's face it, the presents. Still, Notre Dame wasn't too far from my hotel, so after changing, I headed over there. It still had tourists milling around it. I looked up and was amazed by how large it was. I'd seen it on TV and in movies, but seeing it on a screen wasn't enough to prepare me for the way the spires towered over me, or the fact even the front doors were taller than me twice over. Out front stood a crowd of girls. Maybe they were on a class trip, or maybe they were sorority sisters who were enjoying a vacation on their parents. I tried to slip past them, Usually pulling down a ball cap helped keep fans from mobbing me if I wasn't in the mood. That was not one of those cases. A tall drink of water with legs that went on for days and a high blonde ponytail squealed first and pointed to me. That was it. It was like some kind of call, like when you see birds in nature specials screeching out over the rainforest. "It's Tucker Benning!" she screamed, and all the girls echoed her reaction with high-pitched shrieks. I just barely stopped myself from wincing. Instead, I smiled. I played the gracious rock star I always had. When Liam eventually got settled, we were going to need all the goodwill we could get because, come on, a hiatus for 3 months or a year in this industry? Everything moves so fast that we might as well be starting over from scratch. After I posed for a ton of pictures, the tall blonde was still standing with me. Her sisters or friends or whatever had entered the church proper to light candles, but she clearly had another mission in mind, and with the way she was looking at me, it would probably be something she'd have to confess afterward. I wasn't interested in the blonde. I had yet to meet someone as wild and as enticing as Nikki Lorenz. Even if Nikki had more issues than I realized, and possibly a boyfriend in that gray-haired guy, she was worth fighting for. I was going to go back to her apartment, hash things out, and make her mine. Squeezing the blonde's hands, I shook my head and offered her all the truth I could. "I'm sorry, but I can't. I'm seeing someone." It didn't take too long to arrive at Nikki's apartment. I wasn't sure what I was going to find when I knocked on that door. Was gray-haired guy the friend, Claude, she'd said, who owned this place? Looked that way. Because after I knocked on the door, there he was. The massive brick wall cum protector who'd stepped in and helped Nikki while I'd been standing there with my jaw hanging open after she'd slapped that photographer. Narrowing my eyes, I stood up to my full height. It meant the behemoth still had 4 inches on me, which I hated. "Can I help you?" he asked in English. His words were accented, but it wasn't French, and I wasn't sure where he was from. "I'm looking for Nikki." When he just stared at me, I snorted. "Dude, you know me. I mean, you don't know me, but you know I was at the opening. I talked to her in front of you. You know that I'm a friend of hers." "Yes, friend being an operative word," he said. "I'm Hermes." "Great. Is she here?" "Dominique," he said, enunciating her name with slow care, "is busy having a late dinner with Divine. I'm sorry, but she's too busy for the likes of you." "Yeah?" I said, shoving my hands in my jeans pockets. Looked like Nikki's opening had been a success after all. She'd wanted support from a celebrity designer, and she'd obviously gotten it. And it was just as obvious that Hermes here was a friend who'd been invited to wait for her return. I'd only known Nikki less than 24 hours, so I wasn't sure why that hurt so much. It's just my pride, I told myself, and regret that I'd passed on fun with the blonde in front of Notre Dame. Granted, I could go back, see if she was still there, but doing so seemed like too much effort. Chapter 6. Nikki. Last night was such a wash. Despite the drama, I schmoozed with my benefactors, played nice with the models, and charmed Divine into taking me to dinner. The headlines and fashion blogs were mostly focusing on the triumph of my designs, but almost all of them offered a parting shot about me slapping the photographer. The nicer ones swept it under the rug or mentioned it as an aside. Some of the more vindictive tabloid outlets were much worse. The photog hadn't had permission to be there. Security had asked for a permit after her comments and found nothing valid, but only one outlet pointed that out, and she'd obviously baited me with that crack about my boyfriend dumping me. For my mom. Yet I was the only bad girl in the picture. Maybe I always would be, and it was all my own fault. I shouldn't have hit her. She'd pushed my buttons, but so what? I needed to be better than that. My mother had called. I'd seen her name on my cell phone caller ID. There were at least 5 voice messages I knew would be dripping with her usual disdain and censure. It was the last thing I wanted to hear, especially when I had a show coming up and my reputation was already in tatters. I couldn't help but remember how freeing it had felt the day before, standing on the apartment balcony, feeling that rush of adrenaline and danger as I hesitated on the edge. I wanted to do it again, but even more than that, I wanted Tucker. I'd been distracted by the photographer yesterday, and even before then, I'd been on edge. Tucker had been so nice. He'd complimented me, Again and again, I had blown his compliments off. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate them, but I had years and years of my mother's criticism ringing in my ears. It was easy to convince myself that I was worthless or a disappointment, the source of all shame for my family. After all, I had heard that very message on a loop for years. It was something that stayed with you, no matter how hard you fought to find your self-confidence. It was crazy, but it was almost as if the nicer things Tucker said about me, the more convinced I became he was playing me and going to portray me in a way I wouldn't be able to recover from. But that wasn't why I'd blown him off at the opening last night. No, I'd done that because Hermes had recognized Tucker and told me what a bad idea it was to allow myself to be distracted by a rock star. He'd said my mother was already going to hear about me slapping the photographer, so why make it worse? Part of me had wanted to tell him I didn't care, but the truth was, I had already been embarrassed by my behavior with the photographer and seriously concerned by my balancing act on the balcony earlier. Never mind my mom being pissed that I was hanging around with a rock star. I was more concerned that I was going to drag said rock star down in flames with me, and the truth was, he was too nice a guy to do that. I was a mess, one that Tucker didn't need when he was trying to figure things out with his band. I'd realized that around the time Tucker had kissed my cheek, when he'd greeted me at the opening, and everything that had happened afterward had merely cemented that belief. Only today, by myself, having had a chance to breathe and calm down, I missed him. Enough to call him, even as I ignored the blinking light on my phone that was teasing me about my mother's sure-to-be vitriolic messages. Yeah, Tucker's voice sounded over the phone. Hey, I said, my voice startled but also edged with joy that he actually picked up. Yes, it took him 4 rings before he actually did it, but he could have sent me straight to voicemail, so it had to mean something that he hadn't, didn't it? His voice was hesitant on the other end, and I could discern the suspicion in it. Hi, Nikki, what's up? Because I was just on my way out. Tucker, I'm sorry about blowing you off last night. Silence. The event and the photographer, all of it set me off. I treated you horribly. More silence. Tucker, will you let me make it up to you? He exhaled quietly, but the sound screamed his frustration and his disdain. Panic made my heartbeat pick up. Was he going to turn me down? Tell me to take my apology and shove it? Please, Tucker, I said. Let me make it up to you. You don't have anything to make up to me, Nikki. Of course I do. I owe you so much. You came to support me at my opening, and you didn't have to, and your reward was me being a neurotic monster to you. When he didn't argue with me, I winced, then bit my lip. Look, meet me out at the Pont Neuf. Have you heard of it? No, but... I held my breath. Please don't let him blow me off. Please let him give me another chance. But I can Google, or when in doubt, ask Siri, he finally said. I'll figure it out. I let out a shaky sigh of relief. Good, I'll see you there. And thank you, Tucker. It's beautiful, don't you think? I asked, looking out over the expanse of Pont Neuf. It was the oldest bridge still up in Paris and looked like something out of a castle. It had rounded pillars and was made of cobblestone, resembling something out of a fairy tale. I'd been to Paris more times than I could count. When I'd been younger, Mom had dragged me here almost as often as her Louis Vuitton luggage. Part of me had grown a nerd to the beauty of the City of Lights. It was where I worked, where I needed to make the right impression. Still watching the water slip under the bridge and seeing the sights behind me, even the famous tower not too far behind us, I was taken aback again by the beauty of the city. I had a feeling based on his wide eyes and the look of awe on his face that Tucker was taking it all in as well. It's really something. I bet it'd be even better if we'd come out here at night, seen the city all lit up. I took his hand in mine, grateful when he let me. I think we can put that on our itinerary. I have to prepare for my show, but I'll try and be accessible. I just have so many last-minute decisions to make, and I'm terrified. There's even more pressure than before, because my store opening didn't exactly go off without a hitch. You could say that again, he added, pulling his hand away and hunching his shoulders. Staring out to the water, Tucker focused his attention there as if he were searching for a lifeline. It felt harder to breathe, as if something were squeezing my chest hard. Sitting down on the railing, I was seized again by that crazy urge, just like on my balcony yesterday. If I cheated death again, then anything that came after, even explaining myself to Tucker, couldn't be any harder. Failing that, I'd fall into the Seine, and even if I didn't make it out alive, would that really be that bad? But that was crazy talk. I couldn't very well climb onto the railing in front of Tucker. I couldn't become addicted to what was clearly a dangerous habit. And I couldn't allow thoughts of death and dying to become an iota more alluring. I just needed to channel my energy in a healthy way. I had a show coming up. I had to focus. I'd accomplished so much with my designs. The ticker tape and the finish line were looming, and I wasn't just going to throw myself into the Seine out of desperation. Maybe if my show bombed, I could revisit that idea. Sometimes when I'm scared, I act a little crazy. And I'm scared, Tucker. I admitted, my voice as small and quiet as it had been as a teenager. It was the meek tone I used under my mother's interrogations, the voice that was mostly about surrendering. It was all about the weak side of myself that I despised. His eyes met mine, and his expression softened significantly. Of failing? Of you, of how good, how grounded you make me feel. How much you make me want to believe the wonderful compliments you give me. I know I shouldn't. You're a guy who wants to have fun, and you're so young. I'm not a child. No, but you're still a few years younger than I am. I usually date men 15 or more years older, established guys, men you can settle down with. Tucker snorted, and I wasn't sure if I'd cleared things up or wounded him more. Knowing my foot-and-mouth disease, I'd probably done the latter. I never had luck with anyone, but especially men. We just met, Nikki. We are about having fun, not settling down. He side-glanced at me. Right? Of course, but that's my point. We're not about commitment or long-term or forever, Tucker. But I want to believe what you say. I need to. So what do I do when you walk away? How can I believe anymore? It took forever for him to sit down next to me, and I was terrified during those long minutes that he wouldn't. Despite his tattoos and bravado, despite his rock star reputation, he was a good man. And I felt like I needed him, that somehow he could get me through the next 2 weeks, and whatever tortures and vindictive reviews that my mother had waiting for me. He reached out then and wrapped his arm around my shoulders, and I was grateful for his support, even if I'd already managed to take him for granted. Doesn't Hermes make you believe? I blinked. How do you know his name? I bumped into him at your apartment. I went to see you last night since the opening didn't really go well for us. So tell me, he doesn't make you believe? He doesn't. That's because no one can. I can't either, Nick. You have to believe. And even though we're not about forever, that doesn't mean we can't enjoy our time together, and that I can't try to make you believe in a way that sticks. And how do you think you're going to do that? By making you see yourself the way I see you, as one of the most amazing women I've ever met. I snorted and looked back out at the water. Oh, please. No, I'm deadly serious, Nick. You're talented, smart, a go-getter, not to mention beautiful. Who wouldn't want to hang out with you? As I stared at him, what I'd suspected became utter certainty in my mind. There was something to the rocker, something deeper about Tucker Benning than the world who loved Point Break knew about. A man this comforting had a deeper, more honest soul than he was letting on. The leather jacket he toted around was his armor, protecting a kind and sensitive heart underneath. I could feel it. I kissed Tucker long and hard. You should run away from me right now. But I don't want you to. I need you. I need you so much. He reached up and stroked my cheek. We're all damaged goods, Nick, and I think I'll take my chances. Tucker finished before kissing me. That was all the motivation I needed to follow him back to his hotel. Chapter 7. Tucker. With Nick, I never knew which woman I'm going to get, and that was a huge part of her draw. 1 second, it could be Dominique Lorenz, the businesswoman living in her mother's shadow. The one with the faraway look in her eyes and the shadowed gaze who could smack a photographer then freeze me out. The next it would be Nikki, the fun and flirty girl who'd rocked my world. Tonight it was Nikki. She pulled up to the front of my hotel on a motorcycle, one of the sleek Ducati models, wearing leather pants that were practically painted onto her legs and a low-cut red halter top. Her red hair flared out around her shoulders. I sucked in a breath. My life and its mistakes were legendary, especially on the rock and roll circuit. In that moment, I realized my next one was probably the woman riding through Paris congestion and going about 30 miles an hour without a helmet. That was the reason I figured she was my next mistake. The very fact I noticed she wasn't wearing a helmet, and how worried that made me. I imagined her getting into an accident. All that beautiful flesh, her beautiful soul, messed up on the pavement. It freaked me out how much it freaked me out, and I quickly shoved the thoughts away. I wasn't her dad, thankfully, and if she wanted to be channeling her inner hellion, then I was more than happy to help. I walked up to her as she idled the bike. "You have a long day prepping for your show?" Me, I'd spent the day sleeping and then grabbing food at the one McDonald's I could find. The fancy French cheeses and pastries had gotten old after only a couple of days. I wasn't sure you'd be over. "I have big plans, Mr. Benning," she said, her smile wicked and devilish. "Then," I said, hopping in front of her and gripping onto the bike, "tell me the where and how to get there, and I'll take us over." "You ride?" "What kind of rocker would I be if I didn't?" I replied. Of course, I didn't tell her the first time Liam and I had ridden dirt bikes, I'd broken my femur. It had taken close to a year to heal, and my mom spent most of it threatening me within an inch of my life if I ever rode a motorbike again. Of course I'd been hooked. I'd gotten a lot better and had a few Harleys back home. In comparison to the thrill of riding the open road with the wind in my hair, other vices could seem tame. On a bike, I could be anywhere I wanted, answering to no one. I liked that about it. Especially now. Nikki leaned in to whisper the directions before we departed. "You got it, or do I have to help?" she purred. Grinning, I looked back and stared into her gorgeous eyes. "Trust me, Nick, I'm in control here." When I pulled up to the valet, I snorted at the bar's name. Sacre bleu. Seemed kind of old school for what I figured would be a hot club. "So this is the place, huh?" Nikki chuckled. "It's a place for expats. The name's sort of a joke. It's not authentically French, or authentically anything for that matter. If you want to party, hear good jams, and drink, then this is the place. I've been coming here since I was 14, and it's epic." I tossed the keys to the attendant and whistled a bit as Nikki slipped him a huge wad of bills. The bike was definitely going to be cared for well. Slipping her arm through mine, Nikki led me to the front of the line and grinned back at the massive mountain of a man serving as the bouncer. "Joe, how are you?" she asked. The man spoke with what sounded like some deep southern accent. Alabama or Louisiana, maybe. "Hey there, kitten. You have a new guy." "Oh, hey. Aren't you the drummer from Point Break?" I grinned, always happy when a guy, and one in his 20s at that, appreciated our music. We'd started out with an edgier sound. In the beginning, Liam wouldn't have known one string instrument from another, and our sound had definitely evolved. Hence the reason we'd hired Abby in the first place. "Yeah, I am," I said, reaching over and shaking his hand. "Then even if you weren't with Nick here, we'd let you in, man. Have a blast. The band on tonight isn't that good, but the one we had bailed last minute for a gig." My smile stiffened a little. Doesn't it suck when rockers change their plans last minute? Like when he cancels a world tour to spend time with his girlfriend. If they let me give a few licks on the drums, I'll see what I can do. "Definitely, man. Save us from mediocrity," he finished, lifting the velvet rope. "Have a good time." "Always plan on it," I said. Nikki winked back at him and laid her palm flat on my chest. "How can anyone have a bad time with me, Joe?" "Scratch that, then. Don't do anything a sane person wouldn't do, Tucker." "Well, no one ever got that out of me before, but thanks for the good advice," I added, stepping into the club and wincing. He hadn't been wrong. The band on the stage was okay. People were dancing a little on the tiny floor space provided, but most were lounging on the car seats scattered throughout the club. No, not those ones for little kids either, not like booster seats. Leather benches out of old classic cars, huge monsters like from classic Chevys. There were street signs and even hazard lights. The interior of the club looked like a mix of a classic car lover's dream and like an explosion had rocked a city street, fast and furious with an apocalyptic vibe. "Nice," I said, my tone appreciative. Nikki smirked back at me and made a beeline for the bar. "I told you this place was awesome. Most of the patrons totally speak English. Not that most places can't in a city like Paris, but this place encourages it. No attitude needed. Like I said, expats. They're the nicest people on earth," Nikki continued. I followed after her, admiring how gracefully she walked in the massively high stilettos she was in. They were normal black heels, so I assumed she was wearing something she hadn't designed. She grinned at the woman with the electric blue hair behind the bar. "Tilly, it's been forever." "It's been 6 months, girl," the bartender answered back. "We missed you. What will you have?" A bottle of your finest tequila and 2 shot glasses. If the woman recognized me from Point Break, she didn't say. That made sense. Paris was like LA or New York. A big club like this was going to get famous people. The long-timers and bartenders or staff who knew how to stay employed were the ones who knew to not make a big deal out of things. We got our drinks, and Nikki nodded to a large and comfy white leather bench seat. I sat down next to her and pointedly ignored the few women staring my way. For tonight, Tucker Benning was both taken and not talking to the fans. Some nights you just needed time for yourself, and if Nikki wanted some fun, I was going to give all I had to give it to her. My saucy vixen poured me a shot, and I chugged it down, loving the way it burned down my throat and made my gut feel like it was on fire. It was smooth because it was expensive, but it was a fierce tequila and still had that fire that attracted me deep down. She took her own shot, then quickly poured and downed a second. I tightened my grip just a bit on her knee, an instinctive message to slow down. She stared at me and took a third shot, a clear message to go to hell. Fine, I just keep an eye on her and make sure she didn't get into too much trouble. Wasn't that a funny thought? A relationship where Tucker Benning, party animal, was the responsible one. Civilization as we knew it might be collapsing outside. If me being the level-headed guy on a date wasn't a sign of the end of days, I wasn't sure what was. Maybe dogs and cats living together. It burns in all the best ways, she said. But I can say that about you too, baby. You're sweet, I said, lowering my voice to a rumble. She held out the bottle. Part of me wanted to meet her unspoken challenge, my pride unwilling to let a little thing like her drink me under the table early on. Part of me wanted to keep up with her shot for shot, but a bigger part of me wanted to stay sober so I could protect her. In the end, it wasn't a difficult choice. I declined the drink. This band? Joe's right. They do suck, I said, wincing as the reverb hit deafening levels. They were going to kill the amps if they didn't adjust. You need to get up there. You have the invite. She dragged me to my feet. I wanted to be modest, but let's be honest. With us on hiatus, it might be a while before I got on drums and behind a mic again. I usually sang backup. I was no Liam, but I was better than the guys on stage. Nikki shoved the lead singer aside and got to the mic. The crowd cheered just to have anyone else at the mic. Okay, guys, get ready. We have Tucker Benning of Point Break, ready to beat on the old skins here. So let's get ready to rumble. She glared back at the drummer, who wasn't moving. The blue-haired bartender yelled out from across the club, "You'll still get paid!" When the guy walked off the stage, I slid behind the drum set. It was in bad condition. That pissed me off. One of the things about being a rocker was that you had to be good to your equipment so that it would be good to you. It was scuffed with duct tape on the legs. I hoped that Sacre Bleu never hired them back. I held the drumsticks over my head and counted down the beat. The song blared to life and I was lost in the moment, my arms burning, my heart hammering with adrenaline, and the sounds of the drums ringing in my ears. This was why I'd started years ago, and this was what I lived for. I had to have this, even if Liam full out left to settle down with Abby. He was so nuts in love lately that I wouldn't even put it past him. I was singing, too. In front, Nikki was dancing on the stage and throwing her hands up. She was hypnotic to watch, so distracting that I had to focus on the white skins of the drums to keep from missing the beat. That's why I didn't see it at first, just heard the wild roars. Frowning, I kept time as I looked out at the crowd. There was Nikki crowd surfing like it was no big deal. I hadn't seen people do that in years, and I certainly didn't think debutante daughters of fashion magazine editors would even know how, let alone dare do it. She was making far mileage now, almost pushed by the throng of hands back to the bar. I shook my head as I went back into the chorus. In that moment, I felt my heart open in a way. I wondered if I was falling in love. But I couldn't deny I was a little bit scared that she was wilder than I ever was, that maybe I couldn't keep up, that maybe I wouldn't even want to. This was fun, but it would get old. Being with her, eating breakfast on a balcony with her, that wouldn't ever get old, at least not for me. For Nikki, it might be a different story. A flash of light momentarily distracted me, and I lost a bit of the beat and had to speed through to catch back up to the guitarist. Someone was taking pictures. Soon, depending how fast it took to upload, the world would know that at least the drummer and one of the other founding members of Point Break was still rocking hard. Chapter 8. Nikki. I woke up with my mouth tasting like the floor of a New York City cab. And yes, I know exactly how that tastes, thanks to a nasty frenemy in prep school and far too many shots of Patron. I lay frozen for a second, trying to get my bearings. Blinking back the light, I stifled a groan. Judging by the Irish step dancing team in my skull, I was going to have to down water and aspirin like crazy just to feel normal again. But it had been worth it. I remembered being out with Tucker and partying hard at Sacre Bleu. He'd been a god on the drums last night, and it turned out he was a great singer too. He was obviously worried about Point Break's future if Liam Collier stepped down as the lead vocalist. But Tucker could totally rock anything they needed. He just needed more confidence. I shifted slightly, smiling when I pressed against something warm and hairy. I pried my eyes open. Tucker was curled around me, his arms holding me lovingly and protectively. It was hard to reconcile the things he'd promised, the big talk of being just casual, when he was cradling me like this. But I had to do it. I had to remember what Tucker and I were about. Fun times for the moment. That was all. Still, I stared at him for a long time, taking in his beautiful face. Finally sighing, I slipped out of bed as smoothly as I could, grateful he didn't wake up, and then grabbed my clothes and shoved them on. It was short work after that to call a cab to head back to Claude's. When I arrived, I found Hermes sitting at the breakfast table, poring over the morning paper and eating a plate of hard-boiled eggs and fruit. As I found out on the night of the boutique opening, he had a key to Claude's place too, something my mom had apparently asked Claude for, in case Dominique needs us for any reason. What she'd really meant was, in case Dominique messes up again and I need to send my lackey Hermes over to her to get her back in line. Because that's what Hermes was, Anna Lorenz's lackey and my part-time babysitter when my mom so chose. And if I wanted my mom's support with my shoe line, that's what I chose. I wished I could be stealthy or invisible, find any way to sneak past the guy who had regularly been the bane of my existence. But it wasn't like I was Harry Potter with some mystical cloak. Although I did have some amazing stilettos. That should count for something, but they didn't help me at the moment. Well, well, Dominique. How nice of you to finally show up. It's only 10 and I wasn't aware we had an appointment today. And I'd really appreciate it if you wouldn't just let yourself in while I'm staying here. It's rude. Not as rude as you acted at the opening when you slapped that photographer. I pressed my lips together as my head started to throb even more. I don't want to talk about that. Fine. How about we talk about the fact that you reek of liquor and smoke and obviously spent the night with, I'm guessing, a certain rock star. I don't need a caretaker, Hermes. Your mother disagrees, so do I. If you could control your baser nature and your temper, then I wouldn't need to come around, Hermes reminded, his tone as measured as always. I don't have to do everything my mom wants. I'm almost 27 years old. I don't have to listen to any of you. I took out loans for the business, and I'm doing well despite her constant criticism. I don't need you, and I don't need her. Are you done yet? He asked, his tone both grave and serene. No! I shouted, and I hated that my voice was rising, but I couldn't help it. I watched as he typed on his phone, and it was obvious he'd already relayed my rash behavior to Mom. Rage coursed through me, and for a moment I wanted to go berserk, throw things and shout. But then I thought of Tucker, and surprisingly, I felt myself calm. Tucker didn't think I was a fool. He'd been kind to me. He thought I was amazing, and he had faith in my talent. That knowledge, just like at the Pont Neuf, was like a steadying hand to the maelstrom of emotions swirling inside me. Look, Hermes, I began, my voice steadier and calmer than it had been. You know that she'll be at the fashion show, he said. I blinked. What? Your mother will be at your show. She will? But why? She never comes to my shows herself. Normally she just sends her assistants. She wants to support you. She cares about you and your career, Dominique. She really does. He said it with such sincerity. His tone, combined with the news that my mom was actually going to make the effort to attend one of my shows, left me disoriented and uncertain. When I remained silent, Hermes stood, wiped his mouth and hands with his cloth napkin, then softly kissed my cheek. I'll tell your mother you're pleased she's coming. And speaking of you almost being 27, I've set up a celebratory party for you at Jules Verne, and have invited the best of the best. It all came together after the disaster of your opening night. I figured it would help put things back on track. Plus, it's your birthday, a true reason to celebrate. I stared at Hermes. His voice had softened, and he seemed to be looking at me with true affection. I had to admit it felt nice that he'd gone to the trouble of organizing a party for me, that he was trying to help me in spite of everything. "That's very nice of you, Hermes." "Thank you." He nodded. Then, continuing to surprise me, he softly kissed my cheek. "I'll text you the details. In the meantime, stay out of trouble, okay?" After Hermes left, I took a long shower and brushed out my mop of red hair that tended to get frizzy after long nights out. I brushed my teeth 3 times and guzzled mouthwash. Then I got to work. Call me a fool, but Hermes's news that my mom was coming to see my show to support me had filled me with pleasure and a resolve that this time I wouldn't let her down. I'd prove to her that I have what it takes to be a success in my own right. I went to work with my team, happy with the progress they'd made. That afternoon, I delivered some shoes that were set to be highlighted in another designer's show. The retro 80s theme, complete with neon colors, complemented the architectural platforms I'd designed. They highlighted the pinks and greens of the tulle skirts phenomenally and gave it all a surreal, funky feeling. I loved it, and I couldn't wait to tell Tucker. I was enjoying talking to some fellow designers at the after-party when I excused myself to find a bathroom. That's when I overheard Francois Lebeau, the head editor of one of Paris's premier fashion magazines, speaking with a group in a corner. The words he uttered cut into my heart and soul as cleanly as a samurai blade. "Jean-Michel has put on another miraculous show, except for you. Everyone humored her for a while about her designs because who wanted Anna's wrath? But really, there's no need for designers to throw themselves on a pyre like this. It's completely ridiculous. She's a hack. And if the community weren't so scared of Anna's ire, they'd admit it too." I backed away from the palm fronds, separating me from Lebeau and his cronies. Most of them were hangers-on and sycophants, but Lebeau was very well regarded, not just in Paris, but throughout the world. If he felt my design sucked and all the extremes were awful, things I sometimes worried about too, then maybe they did. Hurrying out of the after-party and out into the street, I didn't even have a plan. All I did was keep walking. Eventually, through the cold and frustration, I found myself on the Pont Neuf. I tried to remember my time with Tucker, his words, how wonderful it had felt being with him. Instead, what shoved itself into my brain most was how I'd stood on the railing of Claude's balcony, how scared and reckless I'd felt, how relieved and grounded I'd felt afterward. I didn't want to be scared anymore. I didn't want to be reckless, but I did want to feel centered and at peace. Chapter 9. Tucker. I spent the night after Sacre Bleu in my hotel room, sleeping and recovering from my night out with Nikki, and trying not to feel pissed that she'd snuck out on me this morning and I hadn't heard word from her since. I knew she had things to do, work to attend to, and me being pissed at her for doing that made me worse than a clingy chick. What was wrong with me? I've been known to love and leave more than my fair share of women. Since when did a woman's independence bother me rather than relieve me? So she'd left without sharing breakfast with me. So what? I should just be happy that Nick and I had the kind of night that would make anyone jealous. But the fact was, I wasn't. One day after telling her we were about fun and nothing else, it suddenly dawned on me why I was feeling so out of sorts with her for sneaking off. I did want more with Nikki. At the very least, I wanted more than just being ding-dong ditched come morning. No, that didn't mean I was ready for long-term or for wandering the world for the rest of my life with one girl the way Liam was with Abby. Nikki and Abby couldn't be less alike. Yet, there was something bubbling up between us, and, as nuts as it was after just a few days, especially for someone like me, I wanted her to feel like she could wake in my arms and not be weird about it. I wanted her to be the first face I saw in the morning. No, I wasn't talking exclusivity or moving in, not yet. But I just didn't want to wake up to an empty bed either. That wasn't too much to ask, was it? Maybe it was because I obviously had my own pride to deal with. I could have texted her at any point today, and I hadn't. All because I wanted her to need me too. Pissed at both of us and supremely confused, I grabbed lunch and headed out, hoping the fresh air would clear my head. Soon, I found myself heading toward Pont Neuf. It made sense I'd be drawn there since I'd been there with Nikki. The girl had an impressive ability to haunt my mind, no doubt. But was haunting what I needed? Maybe this was all too much for the both of us. Bad timing, given Nikki's responsibilities with her career and my worries about mine. Maybe I should head back home to LA and stop whining, even if it was in my own head, about what Liam was doing to Point Break. There were 4 of us in the band. Even if Liam ended up leaving, there were avenues to explore and organize. What was the alternative? Just letting it all go? No way. For a moment, as I contemplated it, it was what I wanted to do. Go back to LA, where things were simple, at least when it came to where my head was with women. Because let's face it, this thing with Nikki and me wasn't bad timing just because of her business responsibilities. She was clearly dealing with hardcore stuff, with her slapping that photographer and harboring some serious resentment for her mom. There was train wreck written all over her, and that wasn't my problem. I was drawn to her and I liked her, but I had my own band in tatters to think about and a life back in the States. I'd go to her show first, of course, but then I should go back home. If she were interested in things after that, then she could always track me down. Maybe she wouldn't. Maybe, like me, she'd rethink the wisdom of the two of us hanging out together. Last night had been a blast, but it had been relatively mild on the party hard scale. I was no one's saint, and Nikki and I thrown together would and could create Chernobyl levels of mess and confusion. But man, with Nikki, images of burning and exploding were a temptation as much as a warning sign. It was probably a sign of how obsessed I was with her that as I walked on the bridge, I thought I saw her. There, a woman with wild red hair standing on the wall. At first I was sure it was some kind of hallucination, that it wasn't possible. Then the woman turned and looked at me, and I'd have known those bright, desperate eyes anywhere. It was Nikki. I sprinted toward her, summoning speed I almost only used to run from screaming fans when cornered in hotels or venue alleys. Reaching up, I yanked her down into my arms, confused when she pulled against me. How nuts was she? "What are you doing?" Nikki snapped, finally breaking free of my grasp, but simply backing away instead of trying to hop back onto the railing again. I wasn't sure if my heart could have taken the stress if she had. "What am I doing?" I barked back. She should be thanking me. "What the hell, Nikki?" She stilled then, but her eyes continued to bore into mine. Maybe that was another reason I was so attracted to her. I was used to women who kowtowed to my every wish, ones who just wanted to giggle at the right moments and please me. The groupies who wanted just one more night of backstage passes never challenged me. With Nick, I had to work to break through her walls. "I just like to stand and balance on ledges sometimes." "Okay," I said lamely, even though it was so not okay. My heart was pounding and the adrenaline would be pouring through me for hours to come. When I tried to go to sleep tonight, I'm sure I'd still see Nikki precariously balanced on the railing of a bridge. What would have happened if I hadn't come by? Nikki crossed her arms over her chest. "I was a gymnast as a little kid, until I was about 9 or 10. I feel better when I balance. I get on the edge of things, and it literally changes how I think. It makes me feel stronger and more confident." I started to pace. My fingers twitched. I needed Nikki to understand she meant a lot to me, and that playing games like that on the Pont Neuf was dangerous. Maybe Anna Lorenz wouldn't care if her only daughter was hurt in an accidental fall, but I sure would. "I don't understand why you do this. Is this because of the pressure from your show?" She blinked. "No, of course not. I've had shows before. This is my biggest one yet. Believe me, I know that. I just needed a minute to think. I wanted to feel like I could really let go. Before you showed up and with the wind through my hair, I did feel like that, totally." "Why were you so upset?" She blinked rapidly. "I loaned some of my shoes to a designer to be featured in his show, and..." "And what?" "Some editor hated my collection. Said that it'd be better if the designer stopped humoring me in some backwards bid to please my mom. He said I had no talent, and earlier, Hermes told me my mom was coming to Paris to support me, and she's never showed up at one of my shows before." "Never?" She shook her head, looking for all the world, like a vulnerable, scared little girl. I hated her mother. "I'm more than halfway through my 20s, and I'm trying desperately to be more than a laughingstock. I don't even know if I'm doing that right or not." "You are doing that. You're amazing, Nikki." "Well, tell that to Francois Lebeau." "Francois Lebeau can go to hell," I answered. I cupped her chin with my hands. So some snot-nosed editor was being catty. He's probably jealous because your shoes are cool and they look like art. I mean, I don't know how someone walks in them, but heels were never my style. You don't need everyone's approval. You can't have it. No one can. "No, but I need to succeed. I'm not a kid anymore, and I'm so sick of being Dominique the disaster." "It's going to be okay," I offered, wrapping my arm around her shoulders and pulling her in closer to me. Look, let's go to your place and pick up a few things. Or is Hermes still there? Was he waiting for you this morning?" She swallowed hard and looked back at her hands. "He's Mother's lapdog and her channel to directly spy on me. He has a key and he apparently thinks he can come and go as he pleases." "Then come stay with me." Her head snapped up. "Really? Really? Are you sure? I don't need to be saved. Contrary to what I said at the airport and what just happened, you're not riding in here like some white knight." I snorted because the idea was ridiculous. I was far more the devil on someone's shoulder than the angel, that was for sure. "I'm not trying to save you, just help you. We'll grab your stuff and we'll hang at my place. It'll be all right. You'll have me there. And if that's not enough, then hey, there's room service. You can't beat that." She chuckled and kissed my cheek. "I guess I can't." As we headed back to her place, arm in arm, I had no idea what I was getting into. A sane man would go back to L.A. and not make himself the unofficial guardian of a girl who was rapidly turning into a hot mess. But I'm me, and I've never been overly sane, and Nikki did need my help. Unfortunately, I think I lied to her. I think there is a part of me that thinks I can save her. And even as I pull her closer to my side, I'm aware that chances are she and I, individually and as a pair, are probably doomed. Chapter 10. Nikki. It was a miracle that I was able to get Tucker to wait in the lobby, but if Hermes was indeed back in Claude's apartment, I wanted to avoid more drama. On the walk over, I'd felt the tension pouring off Tucker, and the way I'm feeling, I can't deal with Tuck and Hermes getting into an argument in front of me. I was way too wired and dismayed over the fact Tucker had seen me doing my balancing act on the noof, and had been genuinely freaked out that my life had been in danger. And I suppose it had. I felt bad for scaring him. I felt weak for doing what I'd done. I wanted to do what he'd asked and go back with him to his hotel and spend the night making love and talking and getting to know him better. Since that's what he clearly wanted too, I was going to let it happen. But then I'd give long, hard thought to my next move and whether I should cut Tucker loose, not for my benefit, but for his. When I opened the door to Claude's apartment, I was greeted once again by the sight of Hermes sitting in my love seat and skimming over his tablet's news feed. "Why are you back? I thought we were done here." "Hello to you too, Dominique," he said. "I came back because I remembered something I needed to talk to you about. How was the show?" "It was fine," I lied. I thought the shoes were a good compliment to his work. At least that wasn't a lie. But in my mind, I could have designed shoes that went just as well with his designs, but didn't compete with them so much. Shoes that were less about shock and flash. But every time I'd brought up that idea, my mom had told me I was just getting lazy, wanting easy praise instead of wanting to work for the true accolades. Anyway, I'm just here to grab a few of my things. I promised my friend Tucker that I'd spend the next few days with him. Hermes arched his eyebrow at me, and it was odd to notice his grip on his tablet tightening. His cheeks grew flushed red, and it felt crazy, but I was beginning to pick up jealous vibes from him. That was nuts. He'd been Mother's spy for almost 10 years. A father figure, given he was almost 15 years older than I was. I'd always thought he and my mom had gotten together at some point, because he was so handsome. He had that George Clooney or Sean Connery rugged and salt and pepper look going for him. I'd just never been attracted to him. No, what I was sensing was jealousy had to be about control. I just had to make clear that the one wielding the control here was me. "So you're going off with that rocker of yours." "That's right, but I'm also going to be working. Tucker is fully supportive of that." "I'm sure he is," he said snidely. "And what does that mean?" I asked. "That he's got an agenda. His band canceled their international tour, probably didn't have enough ticket sales, and now he's looking to capitalize his image and that of the band by tying his coat to yours." I burst out laughing. "You're incredible. Point Break is one of the biggest bands in the world. It's not like I picked up some wannabe off of the Sunset Strip. The last thing they need is publicity from me, and they didn't cancel their international tour because of low ticket sales. Believe it or not, it was canceled because the lead singer is in love. Do you know what being in love is like, Hermes?" "Do you?" he shot back. "Is that what this is about? You think Tucker Benning loves you?" "Of course not. I just met him. We're just having fun together. What's wrong with that?" He seemed to relax slightly. Nothing but his way of relaxing. The last thing you need when you're working so hard on establishing your line is bad press from hanging out with rocker gutter trash. Tucker has a great effect on me. Maybe it's hard for you to understand, but he calms me down. Hermes shook his head and turned his tablet to me. It was too small for me to see from here, not with my glasses away from me. Frustrated, I inched closer and wanted to scream when he revealed a link to a page. Of course it was recounting our previous night's fun at Sacre Bleu. Trouble designer crowd surfs for a packed house. Whoever had captured my leap from the stage on their cell, whoever had sold the story off to begin with, had gotten a great shot. It was full of vibrant motion, of me hitting the arms of everyone assembled without too much fanfare. I would have given my leap an 8 out of 10, easy. Does he really calm you, Dominique? It looks like you're back to your old partying ways, and the rock star probably has everything to do with it. It's not like that. And even if it is, so what? We had fun. He's not a bad influence on me. I made the choice to take him to Sacre Bleu. He'd never been, hadn't even heard of it. And that's him calming you? Hermes demanded as he scrolled to the left. Other images popped up of us trading shots at the bar and of me dancing on stage. I was so glad in that moment that one of my most famous drunk habits hadn't come back last night. I'd always loved flashing people when I got drunk enough, and if you added in a stage, it was really a miracle that my goods weren't front-page news on every blog on the planet. You know what it looks like to me, Hermes continued. That there's something you need to pontificate on, I said, my tone clipped and frustrated. That you're trying so hard to promote your shoe line, and now the biggest press so far is you at a bar stage diving like it's 1999. You, of all people, should know that a picture isn't the full story, I ground back, my pacing faster than ever before. I was so tired of everyone expecting things of me. Mother merely expected me to fail, and I was terrified that she was right on that score. Tucker wanted me to take care of myself, when I wasn't sure I could. Hermes wanted, I wasn't exactly sure what he wanted. Did you show this to Mother? I demanded. Is this another report to file so that she knows I messed up? No, actually, I haven't forwarded the link to Anna, but you do know how it looks, even if your line ends up being a success. It will be a success, I said, storming into my room and not caring if he followed me or not. I had to shove my clothes in my suitcase, the fancier stuff, the actual dress I'd wear the night of the show, to complement my own shoe choice, I could have sent directly to me. Anything that would speed up me and Tucker getting back to his place and away from Hermes's overbearing presence would be a blessing. I don't need this, I added as I shoved jeans, silk blouses, and underwear into my bag. Maybe you do. I care about you, Hermes replied. I care that you have a good reputation intact by the time this trip is over. I care that you've put your soul into your store and your line. I do care, and it has nothing to do with your mother, because she doesn't know about this. At least if she does, it's because she found it out on her own. I don't tell her everything. You don't? I didn't tell her about the photographer at your store opening. She called me when she'd gotten an email from someone else. He sighed and reached out to stroke my cheek. I froze then because his touch was completely unexpected. It was gentle and kind, but it wasn't paternal. I wasn't so dense that I couldn't feel the tenderness there. I don't want to do anything but protect you, Dominique. Why can't you see that? I stiffened for a moment before snapping myself out of whatever spell he was casting over me. I couldn't do this. I had Tucker waiting and a show to prepare. There was no way that Hermes, after a decade, was finally making a move. And even if he was, I'd never thought about him like that. I reached for my suitcase and picked it up. Tucker would be rushing up from the lobby soon if I didn't get back, and then we might get complete Thunderdome action between them. I didn't want Tucker strung up. He might be able to handle himself in a bar fight, but Hermes was both sitter and guard. He'd been trained in quite a few disciplines of hand-to-hand combat. He could mop the floor with anyone, and that look in his eye, that voracious hunger, told me that he might just be tempted enough to try it with Tucker. I need to get back to Tucker. I want Tucker, Hermes. Maybe you just think you want him. He leaned lower, and I could feel his breath on my cheek. He smelled of designer cologne as well as a bit of cigar smoke, an old habit that he'd never quite kicked, even if I hadn't seen him smoke since I dropped out of college. I looked back into his gleaming eyes and at his strong jaw, and it hit me then how long Hermes had been in my life. Years and years. And because of that, he knew me. Maybe he even knew what was best for me. I'd only known Tucker for a few days, and while he cared about me, he'd made it clear we were just temporary fun. He was a rock star, and soon he'd be getting back to being a rock star. Then where would I be? Without him? Did I really want to be without Hermes, too? Frightened at the thought of being abandoned and alone, I reached up and touched Hermes's cheek. Maybe instead of thinking of Hermes as my enemy, I should think of him as my protector. Hermes was solid like a rock, like a huge wall that would be a bulwark against all the chaos. He'd been larger than life as long as I'd known him, always there to dig me out of a crowd or offer safety. He lowered his head as if to kiss me, but I abruptly pulled back. I couldn't. I wouldn't. Not with Tucker downstairs. But once Tucker left, and he would leave, maybe things would be different. I need to go, Hermes, but once the show is over, once everything in Paris is over, we'll talk, okay? He stared at me, understanding glowing in his eyes. Somewhat reluctantly, he straightened, but then nodded. We will definitely talk, he said. I gulped at that. It wasn't exactly a threat, but it was an uncomfortable statement of truth. I nodded, then headed out the door. If I stayed, then I might never leave, and I wanted Tucker more than I wanted this, at least for now. Tucker was excitement and comfort, while Hermes was stability. It wasn't lost on me that he'd also be the one man I got involved with, if I got involved with him, that my mother would approve of. Maybe he'd be good for me in other ways, too. Maybe I did need an older gentleman to protect me and guide me on my path, but as much as I tried to wrap my mind around it, my heart rebelled. Hermes might be a smart choice, but he wasn't my choice. Not now. Right now I was headed to someone who excited me and made me feel good about myself in the here and now, flaws and all. Tucker was still pulling me toward him like a massive sun in orbit, and I wanted that. The calm he left me with was real and not some petty illusion, but it was also temporary, and I had to accept that. Chapter 11. Tucker. Nick didn't talk much on the ride back to my hotel room. I didn't mind. She stayed curled up at my side in the taxi, and the feel of her was more than enough to keep me happy and satisfied during the ride. I figured that dealing with that Hermes guy was hard for her, when what she really needed was peace. But was peace what I could give her? I wasn't sure what I was doing with her. I knew that I wanted to help her, and that despite what she'd said, some part of me was channeling my inner white knight and hoped to save her. She was a woman wearing her heart on her sleeve, who was literally balanced on the edge. Things started to change for me when I saw her dive off the stage. She had a wild, free spirit, and I wanted to help her make the most of it, without letting it consume her. She could tell me pretty stories all she wanted about how balancing made her feel alive, but no one would do that without at least seriously considering the prospect of being hurt or killed. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't been there, but I felt it was at least even odds that someone would have been fishing her out of the river. I truly believed that. So she needed me, and even if she didn't want to talk on the way to my hotel or go over whatever Hermes had to say on behalf of the Wicked Witch, that was cool by me. Would you sing for me, Tucker? Her request shocked me, and I felt my instinctive resistance. It wasn't that I couldn't sing, but I was usually backup vocals, even if I helped write a lot of our songs. You heard me sing at Sacre Bleu, remember? I'm not sure what I meant by that, just that I was stalling and had to say something. She nodded and caressed my chest. I know, but I want to hear your voice again. Something sweet and personal. Please? She said, her voice quiet. My mind ran through a bunch of possible songs and stopped on a ballad I'd been working solo on, something I'd hoped to play for Liam and suggest we incorporate into our next album. After only a brief hesitation, I started off a low, mellow lilt. Nikki smiled and snuggled in closer to me, then closed her eyes. Bit by bit, her breathing slowed and her muscles relaxed. Soon she was asleep. She looked so vulnerable and sweet, yet even in sleep her passionate nature and vital energy couldn't be completely hidden. Her red hair was tousled everywhere and fell over her pillow in a messy way, a very visual reminder of the fire that burned inside her, and the fire that stirred within me whenever I was near her. I wanted to help her, but I had no idea how to do that. I just knew that I needed her not to fall off a bridge or hurt herself, that I wanted her to get through the next 2 weeks in one piece, no matter what her mother and her stooge kept putting her through. I'll try and protect you, Nikki, but you need to help me out here. Turning over onto my side, I curled my arm around her and prepared to sleep as well. However, my cell phone started buzzing on the nightstand. Carefully, I slipped out of bed and grabbed the phone, glad that Nikki didn't even stir. She needed as much rest as she could get. Checking my caller ID, I was shocked to see the caller was Liam. He hadn't emailed or texted me in almost a week. I pressed the talk button and headed into the living room. "Hey, Liam, do you know what time it is?" "It's only 8 p.m. "On the East Coast," I countered. "It's 2 a.m. in Paris." "Oh, wow, that sounds awesome. What are you doing there?" "I'm actually not sure," I said, even though I hadn't intended to be that honest. "How about you? What are you and Abby up to?" "We're in upstate New York, seeing some of the falls and enjoying private times at the cabins here." "Still, you sidestepped my question, man. What are you doing in Paris?" "I met someone at the airport, Nikki Lorenz." "Nikki, you mean that fashion chick?" "Shoe designer." "Whatever. Isn't she supposed to be a hot mess?" "She's not," I defended. Sure, Nikki had some stuff to deal with, but none of that was Liam's business. "She's great, man, and you're hardly one to judge. You ran off with our cello player. And it's been the best thing I've ever done. Can you say the same for Paris?" In all honesty, I couldn't. Not yet. Because I didn't know how things between me and Nikki were going to end. "Liam, it's okay. I got this. Hey, when are we going to be in the studio again? Do you know?" "Well, I want to get Abby settled into her own place. Then there's her audition in September. How about—" "Sorry, Abby's calling me for dinner. I have to go, Tucker. You and I will talk later, okay?" "Yeah, but when?" "Soon, I promise. In the meantime, enjoy Paris and your girl." "Liam," I said, but there was a click and the line went dead. Chapter 12. Nikki. You know, at least people like the Mona Lisa. I bet that Da Vinci didn't have to worry about people making fun of him over his designs. "I guess not. But he wasn't making art you could wear," Tucker said. I sat down beside him and looked at the crowded huddle around the surprisingly small frame of the Mona Lisa. Maybe, but I think this week has done more to prove my mom right than anything else. Tucker frowned but didn't say anything. What could he say? Over the past week, I'd loaned shoes to 4 designers for their fashion shows. Twice, the response to my shoes had been lukewarm, and twice downright disdainful. I had my own show coming up in a week, but considering how badly my shoes had flopped on 4 different runways, I was expecting bad things. All witnessed firsthand by my mother, who'd probably smile at me the whole time to really rub it in. I was dreading it so very much. A protracted death by a firing squad I couldn't avoid. "I wouldn't have thought it," Tucker said suddenly. "What?" "That you'd have such a thin skin. You've got to toughen up, Nick." He side-eyed me, which should have clued me in that he was deliberately baiting me, but of course I fell for it. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice a deadly whisper. "You don't know how I feel." The instant the words were out of my mouth, I regretted them, because— "I think I do," he countered, smirking back at me. I swore that grin should be outlawed, that expression should be illegal in all 50 states, because it made it incredibly easy for Tucker Benning to talk anyone into anything. "Look," Tucker continued, "we had a mediocre sophomore album. Sold out a lot to the studio and almost came up with a boy band sound. We got raked over the coals pretty bad. We had tweets hating on us, our forum crashing, all the hate mail you can imagine. I know exactly what it's like to have people spit on something you worked hard on. And come on, your stuff is hardly mainstream." "But that's not what high fashion is about. My designs are pushing the boundaries, establishing new frontier." "Is that from your site?" he teased, his eyes twinkling back at me. "Your pending PR material. You don't have to sell me that your shoes are intense," he said, gesturing to the ones I was currently balancing in. They were from the new line, of course. The shoes were black leather and adorned with silver-plated studs on every conceivable inch. They had a rounded body like a clog, but then slid down to concave platform heels. It was only 4 or 5 inches, not the back-breaking 8 I could sometimes pull off. but they were as intense as anything else I created. They were what the world was expecting from me. Then I don't understand how you can see them and get it, but the Paris fashion scene can't. You make your stuff for the people who love it, not the ones who don't. Just try to remember that. I guess, I mumbled. Tucker stood and took my hand in his. Hey, let's keep going. I want to see more of the Louvre than crowds anyway. I'm sure you can show me a good time. That sounds like a come on, I replied, snorting a little but leaning my head against his shoulder anyway. Sure, we can go to the sculpture section. As we walked, I was silent for a minute before saying, I want to be someone good. No, that's not it at all. I don't want to just be good. I want to be legendary. I want people to think of shoes and my name is literally the next thing that comes to mind. I want to. I stopped then. I couldn't tell even Tucker the next part. That all I wanted was for my mother to respect me too. That I wanted to make my past up to her. We strode into the main collection of busts and statues in the Louvre, which began with the ones from the ancient Greeks. Hellenistic was the word I learned back in high school. I only remembered it because it made me think of Helen of Troy and how much I wished in high school I could be like her, shed that awkward period and launch 1,000 ships. But maybe you need to mix things up and not try as hard, Tucker said. I frowned. That wasn't what I wanted to hear. Of course, if I'd wanted some passive yes man at my side, I wouldn't have started whatever with Tucker at all. I liked his lack of restraint, that wild side of him that called to my own. Look, Nikki, I think you're this amazing and elegant woman. Your designs are awesome, but some are over the top. What if you pulled back a little on some of them, made them less like stilts? Take off a few studs, he said, gesturing to my shoes. But this is my calling card, being extreme, pushing boundaries. Yeah, but does it represent who you are, in your soul? Because from what I know of you, it doesn't seem to. I mean, you're fun, wild, and passionate, but you're classy and down-to-earth, too. Where's that in your designs? Point Break got in trouble because we were trying to be something we're not with our sound. You're doing the same thing. You have this amazing classy eye, and you're just creating something so over the top that it doesn't match you at all. You can't know that, I countered, wandering through the rows of massive statues, the white marble dwarfing both of us. I've worked so hard to be different, to have an edge, and not just be a crowd pleaser. I don't think that going simpler is necessarily about being a crowd pleaser. I shook my head and stopped at a statue standing on a pedestal about 2 feet off the ground. Reading the plaque, I smiled to myself. It was Winged Victory of Samothrace, and the brass placard mentioned that sometimes it was called Nike, like the goddess of victory and, well, now one of the most famous shoe brands in the world. Still, this might be the closest to actual victory I'd ever get, just standing beside the statue. It didn't seem very victorious now because while you could see the body in her flowing white robes and the massive wings spread out behind her, the head and arms were gone. A battered victory. Probably the best I could hope for. Impulsively, I slipped off my shoes and set them on the stand in front of the statue's feet. Giggling, I looked back at Tucker. See, someone likes what I've created. He pulled out his phone and took a few flash pictures and inspired me to do the same. Nice. Famous model in the Louvre, posing with an original Nikki Lorenz design. Excuse me, madam, the nearest guard barked at me. He was a thin, reedy man with a huge mustache, bushy and outdated. You can't just put your shoes there. Just a sec, I said, and continued taking pictures. I'm serious, madam. You have to stop now, and you have to leave. We also don't allow flash photography. It dulls the paint on the portraits and on the statues. Tucker touched my elbow and reached for my shoes with his other hand. Look, we don't want any trouble. We can move on over. The guard nodded. At least your friend seems to understand. Tucker held out my shoes with a grin, just as a bored-looking teenager looked over at us. Suddenly she squealed, an ear-piercing shriek that made me wince. Oh my God, it's Tucker Benning! It was like in the comics when someone turned on the bat signal. Instead of a mad rush of cops and reporters, however, a throng of teenage girls appeared out of nowhere to rush us, all of them shrieking at decibels that made my head hurt. I was going to have the biggest migraine. As I watched, the girls and even some of their moms started surging forward. Yikes! I shouted as I reached for my shoes and felt Tucker yank on my arm. I think the party's over. We rushed out of there, weaving through the crowds before we made it out to the front doors and kept running. I made the mistake of looking back behind me once and saw a surging sea of women and girls screaming and rushing for us. Tucker ducked into an alley as fast as he could and yanked me up against a wall. He was breathing hard even as he held me, and I felt his breath against my cheeks. Leaning close to him, I whispered in his ear, "So does this happen to you often?" He shrugged. "Let's just say I'm used to holing up and waiting out the storm." "Oh," I say, my voice still low even as I blew a little on his ear. He shuddered, and I was having far too much fun teasing him. It was too easy where Tucker Benning was concerned. "Are you saying you don't ever let yourself get caught?" "Mostly I do the chasing, but variety is the spice of life." You like variety, huh?" I asked, my voice more of a purr than anything else. He brought his head lower and kissed me, his tongue playing skillfully with my own. "I like you," he said. Reaching down, he cut my hips, a promise of all the things that would come tonight when we were back at his hotel. I couldn't wait, only I was supposed to be doing something tonight. Tonight! I forgot about my birthday party tomorrow night, officially the big 2-7. I wanted to shop for a special outfit tonight. I bit my lip, then said, "Do you feel like helping me pick out a dress, or are you still busy ducking your loyal legion? Will you try on things tight and red?" I laughed, pulled him closer, and kissed him silly before pulling back. "I think that can be arranged." Chapter 13. Tucker. I'm not the kind of guy who usually sticks around to cuddle. I'm definitely not the guy who will watch a romantic comedy with you, or the person you should take home to mom. I didn't do relationships, and that meant shopping with a woman was definitely not something I was used to. But Nikki had a way of making me say yes to things that I never would have before. She made me want to say yes, which is how I found myself in the middle of a boutique in Paris just as the sun was setting, playing with my iPhone as I waited for her to come back out from behind the dressing room curtain. It wasn't that the hours didn't drag by. They definitely did. However, the few minutes in between, where I got to see Nikki in her dresses with high slits, tight fabrics, and even the playful hints of leather, were awesome. I was scared of the amount of power she had over me already, how much I was changing for her. But at the same time, I couldn't stop myself from falling for her. It was just too easy. She was like this tornado. Sure, she tore through places and destroyed things, but that was part of her appeal. Nikki was as spirited and fiery as her red hair, and she was playing with all of that passion this afternoon in the store, picking dresses she knew would leave me screaming for more. The next number was no exception. She pulled back the curtain and smiled back at me, biting her lower lip and waiting for my response. "So, do you like this one?" Like wasn't even close to the word for how I felt about it. I loved what she had on. It was a red mini dress. "You're amazing, Nick." "That's all?" she asked, twirling around again. "Well," I said, sauntering into the changing space and pulling the curtain closed behind us. "I think the most important part of a new dress is seeing how it looks crumpled up on the floor, because that's how I intend to see it next, Nick." "I'm not sure I'm an escargot person," I said, an hour later at dinner, crinkling my nose at her appetizer. After we bought her dress, we'd headed to a restaurant she knew of that was out of the way, one far from the touristy section of town, and a place we were both less likely to be recognized or harassed by fans and photographers. I'd ordered some chicken and green beans. It wasn't that I minded trying the treats and delicacies that other cultures had to offer, but snails? I had my standards, and something I could see crawling out of the garden wasn't it. You never know, you might like it. I've tried things all over the world, but I don't do anything in shells or with more than 4 limbs. I think those are good standards. I guess I'm just a regular guy after all." She snorted. "Right, Point Break's been famous for a few years now. You have personal assistants and managers and lawyers and all that stuff. I know you must." "True, but I'm basically the same guy I was when Liam and I started the band in high school." Even as I said the words, they rang false. I wasn't the same guy I'd been even last week, before I'd met Nikki. This trip to Paris, being with her, it had changed me, or maybe it had just completed a change that had been steadily happening over the years, but one I'd been fighting. I mean, I was still young, but I was getting older, and that was a good thing. Staying the same would be boring, wouldn't it? With life came experiences that couldn't help but make you grow as a person. And I felt like I'd been growing, even more so after meeting Nikki. Because I suddenly realized that all that I'd held dear before meeting her, not the music, but the partying and drinking and different women, I hadn't missed it, not one bit since I'd been here. And to be honest, the thought of going back to all that after leaving Nikki, well, it kind of made me feel sick to my stomach. The realization was as heavy as a ton of bricks. I stared at my plate, paralyzed by the feeling that my life had seriously just changed. And when I lifted my gaze, knowing that the change involved the gorgeous woman sitting across from me, I didn't know what I was going to do. Nikki was staring at me, as if waiting for me to respond to something she'd said. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" I said, "It would have been fun knowing you in high school. I'm sure you were a total blast." "Nah, like I said, I was just a regular Joe Schmo. I can be obnoxious. But I graduated into all of this when we went platinum. I never want to forget where I came from, or how hard it was to work my way up. Snails or not, lawyers or not, I'm still just Tucker in the basement, deep down, and that's how I'm always going to feel." "Do you think that Liam feels that way?" she asked. "Yeah, I do. Liam's a great guy. Fame hasn't changed him one bit. But yet you said he's putting the band in jeopardy, making decisions that could affect you all for his own selfish reasons." "Yeah," I said, leaning back in my seat. "But those selfish reasons aren't about fame. They're about love. They're about his girl, Abby. And I guess, now that I've cooled down, now that I've witnessed firsthand the crazy things I could do or feel for a girl, I thought, well," I shrugged, then suddenly grinned. "I guess a part of me admires the guy's dedication. Where love's concerned, you've got to go all in, right?" Her gaze dropped to her water glass and she skimmed her finger over the rim. "Right," she said quietly. As I watched her, she suddenly looked sad. Why? Because I'd mentioned love? Because she wanted that kind of love too, and hadn't been able to get it, not even from her own mother? Or was she worrying about the show again? She didn't really talk all that much about her stress to me, but if I wasn't here, would she even have anyone else to talk to? Have you ever thought of getting therapy, Nikki? To talk things through with someone? Your stress? Your mom? The balancing thing?" She shrugged, but her mouth flattened and her expression became mutinous. "It's just, you always push the limit, and it's not just your designs. I mean, with the photographer." Her head snapped up. "If I didn't push the limit, Tucker, we wouldn't have done what we did at the airport. And you're the last person that should be lecturing me on acting wild, rock star." "Well, okay, so obviously we weren't close enough to go there. I guess she'd put me in my place, didn't she?" "It doesn't have to be about comparing which one of us is worst," I countered. "I'm just worried about you, and I think that getting some professional help wouldn't be a bad idea." She rolled her eyes. "I tried therapy once. You know what it involved? Using pool noodles to hit foam targets as a way to get out unconscious anger at people in our lives who were bothering us. I mean, it was like one step above punching a pillow. I didn't need it." "Okay, so that was one place. Maybe there's someone better who can actually help. Just be another support for you." "Look, Tucker, you're not here to babysit. I have Hermes for that. I have you for fun and because you make me feel safe and alive. Can't we just be about that? Because you said it yourself. Fun is all that we're about, right?" She shifted, and suddenly I felt her leg playing with mine under the tablecloth. "We don't need to talk about the hard stuff right now, Tucker." "I guess you're right," I said. If she wasn't going to listen or open up to me, there wasn't much I could do about it, right? Suddenly the realization that Nikki had changed me and that she was somehow pivotal to my life taking a whole new direction dimmed. The fun she talked about having, the fun I talked about us having, seemed like nothing more than a disaster waiting to happen. I wiped my mouth with my fancy cloth napkin. I felt tired all of a sudden, and I felt ready to go home. I'd stay for her birthday party tomorrow night and her show, but then I'd head back to L.A. That way, both Nikki and I could get past the fun and get on with our lives. Chapter 14. Nikki. Zipping up my dress felt like a slow form of torture, each bit of the metal teeth closing up the side of my body, as if sealing me into a coffin from which I couldn't escape. I didn't want to go to the farce that was my 27th birthday party. It wasn't 30, thankfully. I didn't think I could stand a landmark birthday like that right now. I mean, there was still a chance that in 3 years my life would be awesome, Right now, I wasn't sure that I'd ever be able to get past the reputation that was dogging me. I was on edge, I could admit that. The more pressure from the shows and the press I felt, the more anger bubbled up through me. I wanted to control it, but it was getting harder and harder to cope. I was going to the party to appease Hermes, but I feared it was going to be a disaster. I didn't have any friends left. Not really. I'd driven everyone away with my spectacular meltdowns over the years. I'd indulged my deepest, most ravenous instincts, and that had led all of us to pain. If I could walk away from my life, I would too, but I couldn't. The only person who'd be there that I truly felt comfortable with was Tucker, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd said something the night before that had changed things. I'd felt a part of him withdraw from me, and it had caused me to panic. I'd wanted to cling to him, and the more I'd wanted that, the more I'd forced myself to step back. I'd grown too reliant on Tucker, too needy. He'd obviously sensed that. I needed to take advantage of whatever time we had left together, but I also had to wake up. I was here to further my designs, and so far he was right. I'd let my thin skin and the trash talk by the designers and the press throw me off course. I'd let Tucker throw me off course too, because the truth was, all the time I'd been spending with him could have been better spent working with my team and creating buzz about the show, but I'd never regret spending the time with Tucker. When he went back to being a rock star, hopefully taking the spotlight and singing some songs the way he wanted to, I'd revel in the memories we'd made together. Sighing, I brought my gold necklace, the one my dad had given me, to my throat. It complemented the scarlet of my dress, and I reached into my closet for a pair of shoes to highlight the whole look. I hesitated over a pair of supple leather black pumps I'd made. They were more relaxed, a lower stiletto that didn't make my feet ache. Tucker's words about my extreme designs not fitting who I was ran through my head, even as I settled for gladiator sandals that were almost 8 inches high and with ties that wrapped up my calf and shin. I wanted to be able to wear more quality designs, ones made for function and not just to be buzzed about. But that wasn't my brand. It wasn't what I could afford to do right now with my show coming up. Everyone associated Nikki Lorenz with the extremes of fashion, and I had to be avant-garde at all times, even if it exhausted me to do it. Once I'd won over the critics, then I could make some changes, say what I really wanted to say. I just wasn't sure what that was anymore. I'm not sure I've ever known. "Dominique, are you ready?" Hermes asked, setting his hands on my shoulders. Usually he towered over me, but with my heels on, we were far closer in height. It was nice to wear the massive platforms and go from 5'5" at best to almost 6 feet. That was the one thing about extreme fashion that I enjoyed. Maybe it gave me more of a level playing field. Then I looked into the mirror and saw his eyes crinkling back at me. He was ruggedly handsome in a Cary Grant kind of way. He wasn't Tucker with his lean body and cut abs and gorgeous green eyes and wicked smile, but he also wasn't leaving anytime soon. Hermes had tried his hardest to keep me safe, even with me doing my best to screw my life up. I could find it easy to just listen more to him, let him lead my life and protect me for as long as he could stand me. Maybe that's what I should do. "Who did you even invite?" I asked, teetering a bit on my huge heels. He kept rubbing my shoulders, trying to calm me. "All the right people. It's about appearances, Dominique. You don't have to worry about a thing. I'll take care of you, just like I always have." He kissed my cheek. I stilled and tried hard to remember what I wanted, who I wanted, and for right now, that was still Tucker. He was excitement and connection, while Hermes was just the security, that predictable path that might offer comfort but didn't offer much else. The difference between them was similar to the difference between your favorite sneakers and your best pair of heels. Both were a key part of your wardrobe, and both could be comfortable, but only one of them made you feel every inch of the woman you knew you could be. I pulled away and rummaged for stud earrings, just to have something to do, but he wasn't deterred. "I've planned dancing afterward. Perhaps you can save me a dance," he said. It was getting harder to swallow, and beyond that, even harder to balance the two men in my life. "I'll think about it." Le Jules Verne was one of the premier restaurants of the city, and you couldn't beat the real estate. It was nestled partway up the Eiffel Tower. From outside the huge banks of windows, one could look out and spy the skyline for the city of lights, as well as the very steel girders holding up the whole edifice. It was a striking view, made even more breathtaking by the orange-rose glow of the setting sun. The small tea-light candles on each table added to the effect with their flickering lights. When I stepped into the restaurant, I smiled at the collected throng of critics, sycophants, and other designers who greeted me. Some big names I never would have counted on being here had shown up. A few were kind enough to kiss my cheeks and gush over me, which really surprised me given my shoes hadn't been a big hit at the previous shows. I was feeling happy that perhaps the evening wouldn't be a total disaster when I spotted the reason everyone was being so nice to me. In a far corner, near a table set to overflowing with drink selections, was my mother. I inhaled a swift breath and looked accusingly at Hermes. He was looking at my mother with a frown, as if even he hadn't known she would be there. I'm not sure I believe that, but I turned back to my mom. Anna Lorenz had never been more than a size 2 in her entire life. I envied her ability to deny herself more than a couple of protein shakes in a day and a salad. High fashion didn't allow as many curves as my size 6, and Anna Lorenz was high fashion incarnate. Gulping, I steadied my shoulders. There was approved press here, and it was my duty to play nice with my mother, to smile and kiss her cheek. Besides, she'd made plans to attend my show to support me. Maybe she decided to come early as a show of love on my birthday. I was halfway across the restaurant and poised to engage with the dragon lady when someone coughed behind me. "Tucker." I grinned at him, definitely underdressed in jeans and a logo t-shirt. Flinging my arms around him, I relished the way his lips felt on my own, the way his tongue tangled deftly with my own. "I was worried after all the tension at the restaurant last night that you wouldn't come." "Hey, my cougar only turns 27 once, right?" I giggled, actually feeling the tension and stress and anxiety seeping out of me. "It's not that big an age difference, so try again there, Point Break." "Fine, but I couldn't let you run the gauntlet here without someone cheering in your corner. I needed to be here for you. Do you want me to go?" I felt my mom's pointed gaze already burning into my back. The last thing I could take would be losing my support. He was the crutch I needed to get through the night. "No, I don't want you to go, but you might want to run after I tell you that my mom is here. In the corner. I have to go talk to her right away. It's what everyone's expecting." "Is it what you want?" he pressed, concern brimming in his eyes. "Because I could monopolize your time quite easily if you let me." "It's what I need to do, and that's what's important," I countered, wishing I could take the out he was offering me. Kissing his cheek, I smiled back for him as broadly as I could. "It's fine, I have this. Now that you're here." Snaking through the crowd was hard and felt a little like I was walking to my own execution. I smiled down at my mother. She was shorter than I was, barely 5 feet tall, and built so bird-like. Her shoes were heels, but nothing like the skyscrapers I wore. Her cold blue eyes, so like glaciers, stared back at me, and her sharp chin was pointed like a weapon in my direction. I bent down and hugged her as tightly as I had to. Not too much, just enough to be a good shot for the cameras. "So," I said, keeping my voice as low as I could in the vain hope my words wouldn't spread to different magazines and news outlets. "How are you, Mother?" "Disappointed, but that's not new. I suspected your designs would become a passing fad, and looking at reviews so far, I might be right." I felt an immediate spark of anger light up my chest, and resolutely shoved it down. She was right, after all. The buzz about my shoes had been disappointing. My own show hasn't happened yet. "You keep going to clubs and running away from Louvre guards, and I'm sure it won't make a difference," my mother replied, her tone cold. "What? How did she know about the Louvre?" I glanced around for Hermes. Had he followed me? When I didn't see him, only caught a glimpse of Tucker with his back to me, I turned back to my mom. "I wasn't running from guards. Someone recognized a friend of mine, and—" I trailed off when she scoffed. "Right, your friend the rock star with point rupture, the one you went with to Sacre Bleu. Tucker Benning is a talented singer and songwriter too, and it's Point Break. He's still a bad influence. You know how rockers are, and I bet it was his idea to drag you to the club and get you drunk and acting ridiculous." I pulled away from her and my hand was already snaking out, clamping around the neck of a magnum of champagne. "He balances me." She waved her hand dismissively. "You know who balanced you? Us. Your father, but he's dead and gone, and no rock star can replace him. If he has to be dead, at least he doesn't have to see how you're returning to your old ways." I'm not returning to my old ways. And even if I was, can you blame me? Look at all the nasty barbs and whispers you send my way. Daddy loved me. He always encouraged me. But you're right, he is dead and gone, and you blame me for that. You've always made that clear, I said, shakily, trying to keep my voice down, but knowing I wasn't doing the greatest job. A flash went off somewhere close by. I couldn't handle it anymore. I wasn't sure if it was my imagination or not, but I heard the whispers of disdain, the disapproval burbling through all my mother's so-called friends, her nearest and dearest. Still gripping the champagne bottle, I whirled and ran. Storming past Tucker, I rushed out of La Jules Verne and headed for the elevator. Chapter 15. Tucker. I was behind Nikki, and that was what was scaring me. She caught the elevator first, and I had to stand there waiting for a second one to come my way. I felt like some idiot living out a huge joke, just staring at my cell phone screen and counting the minutes until the elevator came back down to the level with La Jules Verne. It had been almost 4 minutes since Nick disappeared, and I knew that was more than enough time for her to do something nuts. When the elevator finally arrived, I headed up after her. Mixed in with my panic concern for her was a little voice telling me that I should get away from her as fast as I could. I cared about her, more than I had about any woman in my life, and it was all so sudden and so fast, but she also seemed set on self-destruction. The elevator climbed slowly up the tower, and I heard the ding ringing out around me. I leapt off the elevator, and what I found was even crazier than I'd expected. There were shards of green glass everywhere from where Nikki had obviously hurled the champagne bottle at the guards as a way to distract them. Now she was already balancing on a metal ledge of the Eiffel Tower, dozens of feet above the cobblestones and tourists below. I got it then, why the guards weren't surging forward. They were scared of what she'd do. Now Nikki basically had all of us hostage. Holding up my hands, I inched as close to her as the guards were and called out her name. "Nick, it's Tucker." She didn't turn around, but she did look back at me, her red hair whipping around her face in the breeze. "Tucker, you should go back to the party. I'm sure Mother and Hermes ordered the best pastry chef in Paris to make my cake. You need to enjoy that. Maybe even pick up one of Mother's interns. You know, one of the normal girls." "I don't want to do that. I don't want to go back to the party at all. Not if your mom is going to upset you." "Nikki, just get down from there, and we can talk this out back at my hotel, okay?" "Really? Or are you just talking me down to be someone else's problem?" "I don't know," I said, throwing my hands up in the air. "Honestly, I have no clue. I know that I don't want to get sucked in, and that everything with you is like sinking in quicksand. I promised myself just fun and no commitment, and here I am trying to save you from yourself. I just don't want to be sucked down, too." Her eyes blazed back at me. "You know it's too late, right? Too late to help me," she sobbed. "Do you know my dad died of a heart attack, Tucker? When I was still partying and drinking and being a fool? My mother told me once that I was the reason, that I drove him to an early grave with my antics. God, it's probably true. And if it's true, how will I ever find peace? By knowing your dad loved you. I heard you say it in the restaurant. And you didn't cause him to die. It was just his time." She said nothing, and I moved even closer. "Is that what the balancing is all about, Nikki? You blame yourself for your dad's death?" "I don't know what it's about anymore, but I want it to stop. I want to get away from here. I want to think. I want to go back to your hotel room, Tucker, like you said. Can we do that?" "Yes, Princess. Yes, we can," I said, relief sweeping through me. She started to spin around to try and face me with her body too, and she screamed as she slipped. I lunged forward then, hoping I wasn't too late. I was. But she fell backwards instead of forwards, tumbled instead onto the floor of the tower. I ran toward her and picked her up in my arms, wishing I could literally fly her out of here before the others showed up. The guards started surging forward, but by now Hermes had finally gotten up here and was talking to them in rapid-fire French. I figured he was giving whatever lines he needed to about, "Do you know who this is?" and keeping it all quiet for the benefit of the Lorenz family. I didn't care. My heart had stopped seeing her stumble. If luck had worked out the other way, she would have smashed into the pavement below. Game over. I had no idea what I was doing anymore. She'd stormed out of her own birthday party and thrown a heavy champagne bottle at the rent-a-cops on the Eiffel Tower. It was completely insane. Why would you even do that? I gritted out as I marched back to the elevator. Luckily, one was already open and I strode inside. When it wasn't moving, I set her down and hit the stop button. Then I saw the cut on her leg, probably from where a bolt on the tower had torn into her calf. The cut wasn't deep, but it was bleeding. I tore off part of my shirt to wrap around her leg. I just needed to feel something. Her shoulders were shaking as she sobbed, and I wanted to hold her close to me, to promise that nothing bad would ever happen to her on my watch. It was those stupid white knight tendencies. I couldn't save her from herself. She needed to face the fact she was her own worst enemy before I or anyone else could help her. There has to be another way to feel alive. She stopped shaking and glared back at me. Most of my life, all I felt is numb. When I get into fights with Mom, it's so different. It's like after the shows this week. All of it makes me numb inside. I pulled her to me and kissed her, not sure about what I was doing anymore. Who was I kidding? I'd thrown out the road map the second I'd bought a ticket to Paris. Besides, I could be pissed all I wanted to, but Nikki had a point. I was trying not to get drawn into her orbit, telling myself that I couldn't get sucked in, but I already had been. I wasn't sure if there was a way to escape, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to. All I knew was that we needed out of this party and away from all the people who pressured her more. I wasn't sure how to keep Nick from falling apart, or even if that was my job, but I knew she'd never seem even halfway sane with Hermes and her mom hovering over her. I pulled her closer, supporting her. Her calf wasn't bleeding as badly as it had been, and I was hoping that it was mostly just a scrape. I hit the button on the elevator to get it going again. "I'm so sorry, Tucker. I know I messed things up. You should leave for your own good," she said, sniffling a little and trying to hold back tears even as she raised her chin. That was my fiery redhead, trying to be so strong even when her pain and fragility was written all over her. She was right. I should leave her. Right here and right now. But I couldn't. Not yet. "I'm confused, Nick. But I have an idea. Let's get out of here. After all, it's still your birthday for a few more hours." It was hard to concentrate as we made our way to the spot I wanted. My mind was running over all that had happened to me in the last few days. It was almost impossible to wrap my head around it. I had no idea what the future was for Point Break. I really didn't. Liam had dodged talking about even returning to the studio, let alone resurrecting the back leg of our tour. Maybe the band would get through it and come back together, or maybe Liam would stay on vacation forever. I didn't know, but I still had a lot of ideas. If I had to build a new band for myself out in California, I would. Maybe it was time to step out of the shadow and do vocals too, not just be the writer and backup vocals. Maybe it was a biased jury, but Nikki had liked the song I'd sung her the other night, the softer side of me. I had options if I went home, but I was scared that if I left, she'd crash even faster. Nothing made sense. Nothing was a good choice. Leaving her would feel like cutting off my arm, but I didn't want to watch her tail spin. I'd seen it happen before with other musicians. You saw them party as hard as anyone, and then they'd get thin, forget to eat, be too plastered to talk much at all, or at least not say anything you could understand. Then there'd be the 911 calls until the final one, where they couldn't be saved because no adrenaline shot could get them back. She was on the same path, and it scared me. I was out of my depth times a million. "It's beautiful at night, isn't it?" she said as we walked to the large circular pool in the center of Tuileries Garden. People were around, but it wasn't nearly as bustling as it would be in the morning and afternoon. I led her to the pool, and we both looked up at the water jumping out of its center, its own fake geyser. It was beautiful to watch. "I want you to have a happy birthday, Nick," I said, before singing her the happy birthday song. It was odd. I'd been in a million concerts by now, everywhere from stadiums to nightclubs, but with her, it felt harder, like I couldn't afford to mess up even a little. I had my biggest performance right now, trying to convince her that the world was just worth it, that it was worth getting help. When I finished, I could see the tears welling up in her eyes. "So," I added after this, "was it all right?" "You know you're an amazing singer, don't you, Tucker?" she asked, for the first time tonight really focusing on me. I don't know why it was always Liam Collier before. He was just the front man. It was what he was best at, and I liked being the behind-the-scenes guy more. Besides, I've given the beat or been the backup vocals. And you're biased. Maybe you're hearing what you want because of us and not because of my actual talent. I could try and go solo, but Liam was always better. She leaned up and kissed me, her passion promising so many things when we got back to the hotel later tonight. I don't believe that. Not at all. Chapter 16. Nikki. I passed out soon after we got back to Tucker's hotel. It was dumb. I was dumb. Everything that had happened last night had been all my fault. I let my mother get to me like she always does. No matter how much Hermes had promised he'd be kind to me and keep me safe, and no matter how amazing Tucker had been coming after me on the Eiffel Tower's railing, I'd still managed to make a massive fool of myself. Even after all of that and our fight, Tucker, my rock star, had sung so sweetly to me at the Tuileries Garden. It was just the usual happy birthday song, but in his sweet tenor and with his eyes gazing into mine, it had felt like we were the only two people on the planet. The next thing I remembered was blinking awake with the sunlight in my eyes, pouring through the window next to the bed. Tucker was beside me, snoring softly. Groaning quietly, I dragged myself to the bathroom. My right leg was still wrapped with a torn section of Tucker's t-shirt. It was brown and crusted now, almost as hard as cardboard from where it had soaked up the blood from my wound. I rifled through the medicine cabinet and pulled out some hydrogen peroxide. Pulling off the makeshift bandage, I winced when I saw the crusted blood all over my leg. I was pretty sure I didn't need stitches, or it wouldn't have stopped bleeding last night on its own. As I wiped peroxide over it, I shuddered as it burned over my calf, making the crusted blood bubble and slough off. The skin underneath looked pretty normal, and the cuts had scabbed over. That was a relief. I took a hot shower to clean off, but made it a quick one. I wanted to get back to Tucker. I needed to thank him. Slipping out of the shower, I toweled off just enough to make sure that I was dry. I looked in the mirror and brushed my wet hair behind my shoulders. Then I went back into the bedroom. I slipped under the covers. He shifted away from me. Is everything okay? Yeah, maybe I just need a break. Reluctantly, I pulled away and sat up next to him. I don't understand. Is it band stress? He sighed and rolled over onto his side. I wouldn't call it band stress, actually. Then what would you call it? Tucker ignored me at first and just pulled the comforter over his shoulders and up to his chin. Nick, just drop it. I don't think it's that important. It must be pretty important, I said, pulling the comforter back down. You've helped me so much in the last few days that I need to help you. Whatever's on your mind, you can tell me, I promise. So you should feel free to just unload on me. I can be that for you. I don't want to talk about it, he mumbled. Reaching down, I cupped his chin so he'd look me in the eyes. I do, please. This relationship can't be equal if we don't share. It's not just about me using you, I swear. So I'm begging you, please tell me what's going on. Why are you so upset? We really shouldn't get into this, he deflected, sliding out of bed and heading to the bathroom. Look, I'm getting a shower and then we can grab breakfast. That sounds like a fair deal, right? No, now you're just running out of excuses and being pathetically transparent. What's wrong? I need to know, and I need to know now. Even as I asked, my voice was shaking, because despite everything I'd asked him, I knew what was wrong. I knew it. Me. I was what was wrong. Tucker shook his head and threw up his hands. I didn't want to say it, but you always push, Nick. What do you think my problem is? I'm serious. What could possibly be messing with my head this badly? It felt like I'd swallowed glass. It hurt to breathe because there was no denying the truth of his words. They were as intense as his gaze and the ragged breaths he was taking. You're having problems because of me, because I'm worried about you. Can you even understand that? I leapt to my feet and started pacing by the bed. So basically now you're blaming me for what? Making you impotent? That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that I didn't sleep last night. I kept having nightmares about the Eiffel Tower. Nikki, you could have died, and I don't know what kind of relationship you were referring to earlier, but we're not in a relationship. My head snapped back at his blunt statement. He was right. I'd been in total denial about my problem. I'd already known it, felt it, but it was confirmed for me in the crazed fear in Tucker's gaze. The fear that I'd put there. But I couldn't admit that to him. So, I deliberately shut it all down. My emotions, my feelings for him, my latent hope that I hadn't even realized I'd harbored, that we were building some kind of relationship. Maybe one that would mean he wouldn't leave me. I shut it all down and concentrated on the exact thing that Tucker apparently wanted for me. I concentrated on surviving. I'm sorry, Tucker. You're right, I said quietly. You didn't sign on for any of this. We were about some fun, that's all." "Nikki, that's not what I said." He reached out for me and I backed away, swiped up my dress and walked to the bathroom. "Just let me get dressed, Tucker, and then I'll get out of here." I shut the bathroom door and locked it. Then I got dressed as fast as I could. When I came out, Tucker was standing by the window, looking out at the view of Paris. I studied him for a minute, wanting to imprint his image on my brain, to take out in all the lonely years ahead of me. "Hey, I once rocked Paris with Tucker Benning," I tell my grandkids. But then it dawned on me. The way I was headed, I probably would never have grandkids. Choking back a sob, I smiled at Tucker, who was now staring at me. "Nikki," he began softly, and I could see it there, written on his face. He knew I planned on leaving, and he was going to let me. "Goodbye, Tucker Benning. It's been a pleasure meeting you, and I really mean that. Please don't let Liam's dreams wreck your own. I know he's your friend and you love him, but you're an amazing musician and a wonderful singer, and you deserve the best." He frowned, then started toward me, but before he'd taken more than 3 steps, I threw open the hotel door and walked out. On my way to the elevator, I kept waiting for him to call my name or grab my arm to stop me, but he never did. Chapter 17. Tucker. I'd been in Paris for over a week, consumed by the whirlwind that was Nikki Lorenz, and ever since she left my hotel room 2 days ago, I hadn't been able to sleep. Not a wink. Soon I'd be back in the States, and I was hoping that would change, starting on the plane. When it was time for me to check out of my hotel, I shoved my few belongings in my duffel bag and headed straight for the airport. I fought the urge to pull over and find Nikki the entire way. I had to put distance between us. I had to concentrate on me. She'd be okay. Despite how tough her mom was on her, surely her mom would help her. And if not her, that guy Hermes. Plus, when I was gone, there would be no more distractions, and Nikki would focus on her shoes and her career. I just hoped the show went well, because if it didn't, but I couldn't think about that. I wouldn't. Of course, hours and hours later, when I was back in New York, waiting for my flight to LA, I was still thinking about it. Turns out my next move found me. After almost a week of radio silence, Liam called me again. He led with an apology for throwing the band into a tailspin and said he wanted to talk. I blurted out that I was at the airport and asked him to meet me for lunch at a cafe outside of Central Park. He agreed instantly, and before he hung up, he promised he had a game plan that included plans to finish our world tour and working toward our 4th album. What a relief. The last thing I wanted was for Point Break to blow apart and for everything we'd spent years building to be lost. Plus, more than that, Liam was my best friend. I'd missed him. More than my fears about what was going to happen with the band, I'd feared what was going to happen to us, to our friendship. Now I was hopeful things would work out. I'd already lost Nikki. If I could keep my relationship with my best friend, I had to try. When we met up, it felt odd shaking his hand. Usually I just wrap an arm around him in a macho half hug and pat his back, but I wasn't quite ready for that. I was open to olive branches, but I wasn't feeling generous enough to approach everything wide open. It seemed like a terrifying way to get stabbed. Maybe not even in the back, just full on in the chest. It wouldn't be worse than most of what had happened lately. It seemed that some of my bitterness wasn't that crazy or out there. Liam hadn't mentioned that Abby would be joining us, but as we both sat down and started skimming through the menu, she sauntered over and sat next to Liam. His arm draped casually around her, and I studied them, hurt and anger filling me, but not because of anything having to do with Abby. Granted, I'd been a jerk to Abby when we'd first met. She was serious and straight-laced, a real musician, but that wasn't why she'd rubbed me the wrong way. Maybe even back then I'd sensed the power she'd hold over Liam. I'd been afraid she'd be the Yoko Ono to our Beatles. But since then, I'd seen how happy she made Liam. He'd found the love of his life and was so soppy and happy. Despite everything, I was happy for him. It was the most natural thing in the world for him to wrap his arm around her and let his fingers play in her hair, while she tapped her fingertips on his thigh. Their casual intimacy communicated exactly how much they cared about each other, how easy everything was between them. And I was hurt and angry because I suddenly wanted that so bad. With Nikki, only I couldn't have it. "Hey, Tucker," Abby said, her tone guarded. "How are you?" I shrugged and sipped the water already set out by the waiter. Honestly, I've been a lot better, Abs. She frowned and pursed her lips back at me. Liam said I should come along. Maybe he misjudged the situation. Liam crossed his arms over his chest, and I was kind of surprised that he bothered to break that much contact with Abby. They seemed like they were conjoined twins lately. If you have a problem with Abby, Tucker, then you have a problem with me. I don't, I groaned. But I've been having the worst luck with women myself, so I guess I just wish I was as smooth or blessed as Liam. I'm jealous of what you two have together. Oh, well. Abby and Liam both looked stunned. I couldn't even regret whatever impulse had made me bring it up. Suddenly, in front of my best friend and his girl, all I wanted was to unload all my troubles and ask their advice about Nikki. I can, if you guys need to walk or grab a private minute, then you can, Abby said. Only if you want to. I wouldn't blame you for not wanting to hear my girl drama. I never thought I'd be the kind of guy who had drama, period, I said, placing a sandwich order when the waiter came by and waiting for Abby and Liam to order their meals before I continued. I went to Paris and came back completely pathetic. Nah, you were always higher strung than you thought, Tucker, she chirped. But if you need any help, at least ask. Liam almost blew it with me. There was no almost about it, Liam said quietly as he took Abby's hand and brought it to his lips. After she smiled at him, he turned back to me. I really blew it, but Abby gave me a second chance. Maybe that's what you or she needs, a second chance to show each other your best. I shrugged, thinking about how Nikki made me feel when we were at our best. It beat a shot of the richest scotch or a warm fire on a cold upstate New York night. I'd only known Nikki a week, but I'd take spending time with her over anything I'd done with women in the past. Maybe. Problem is, I'm not at my best. If I was, I would never have bailed when things got rough. I would never have left her to deal with things on her own. But I did, and now I'm miserable, I replied, downing my drink. Liam sighed, and I know I played a part in making you that way. I shrugged. Yeah, it sucked that we canceled tour dates, that me and the guys don't even know what the future of the band is. When Liam remained quiet, I got defensive, my tone snottier. It's not like you've worked hard to stay in touch. I asked before, and you blew me off. It's not just your livelihood on the line, you know? Abby frowned and narrowed her eyes at Liam. You haven't told him? Told me what? I asked. Look, I was a jerk for letting you hang out there for a week. I'm trying not to do that now. Abby and I talked. I want to be with her here in New York for a few months. I want to get past her audition, support her. But then we're going to finish the tour. In the meantime, I was hoping you guys wouldn't mind going back to the studio, here in New York. We could play with a few things, grow our sound. I don't want to go soft, but I like what strings have brought to the mix. I wouldn't mind a few more ballads. That's all that I'm saying. I grinned, my chest feeling light for the first time in days. We weren't soft rock, but I liked the ballads too. That was the song I'd started and never shared before. Those few unfinished verses that I'd already sung to Nikki. She'd been upset, and my song, raw as it had been, had calmed her and sent her into a peaceful sleep. It made me think something was there, enough that it would be worth finishing, enough that it could be the most important bit of music that had ever flowed through me. Dominique's song. Yeah, I like that idea a lot. So, we're getting back in the studio? He nodded and squeezed Abby's hand. I already talked to Corbin and Wes. They're on board. If you are, we can record. Then in a few months, begin the tour in Asia, then Europe. I'm on board, I said quietly. It's just, I have some ideas too. If you're open to hearing them, I want to co-write. I also want to try singing lead on at least one song. Abby nodded. You're good at harmonizing. It's more than time for you to try stepping out too. I mean, it's your 4th album. Go big or go home with experimenting, right? Liam studied me silently for a moment, then grinned and held out his hand. I agree. I shook his hand, then we both laughed, stood, and hugged. So, do you want to tell me more about the mystery gal? Liam asked later. After lunch, Abby had headed out to meet a friend, and Liam and I had taken a walk and talked a bit more about the plans for the band. Her name is Nikki, I reminded as we walked through the trees and past the various painters and artists in the park. You know, as in Lorenz. We talked about that. I know her name, but I don't know anything about her. Nothing except what's been in the press. And I get that there's more to her than that if you're this torn up about her. That's the problem, I moaned. I am torn up. I really care about her. But the things she does, man, it's not just having fun in a club or even picking a few fights. She keeps having this weird urge to climb up on railings. Railings? He asked, quirking a brow at me. Yeah, I'm not kidding. I found her balancing on the Pont Neuf like it was a beam in a gym. Then she had this freak out and jumped onto a ledge of the Eiffel Tower. It keeps me up nights. That is some heavy drama. Is she going to get help? I suggested therapy to her, but she blew it off. Then there you go. You can't save someone who won't get help. I know. That's why she's still there and I'm here, I added, shoving my hands in my jeans pockets. But I can't help feeling like I let her down somehow, that I let both of us down. Maybe this was all a test. A test for what? For whether we were ever meant to be more than just fun together. So what? Are you saying you love this girl? Yeah, I said, finally saying it out loud. Or at least, I think I'm falling in love with her. Liam nodded. I understand. But you haven't known her very long. Maybe you just got caught up in the drama. The White Knight syndrome. Maybe when you've been back home for a while, you'll forget all about her. The way you forgot about Abby when she came back here? Abby's everything to me, Tucker. Right now, I think I feel about Nikki the way you feel about Abby. I've been miserable. I'm just terrified when I'm with her, she's gonna hurt herself. But she might do that anyway, whether I'm with her or not. And what if I can convince her to go to therapy? What if she just needed more time to get there? More support, more love. Maybe she just needed to know that she was loved, that someone was going to stick by her while she got it together enough to seek help. And I'd kicked her in the teeth by leaving her just like everyone else in her life had. I let her down badly, I said, and I need to work on getting a flight back to Paris. I can't just walk away from her. It's wrong. It's so wrong. Abruptly, I started jogging back in the direction of my hotel. Liam ran with me. You sure about this, Tucker? Yeah, I'm sure. I'm going to prove to Nick that there's one person who will stand by her no matter what. Me. Chapter 18. Nikki. After I left Tucker, I checked into another hotel room. I didn't want Mom or Hermes tracking me down at Claude's, and laid in bed for days, getting up only for the bare necessities of food and bathroom breaks. I was numb. I didn't feel anything. It was like separating from Tucker had separated me from all emotion. At one point, however, a thought occurred to me, and it was like a dam had burst. I realized I didn't feel anything, and that meant I didn't feel like balancing on balconies or bridges either. Cue the hysterical laughter. At least the pain of losing Tucker was good for one thing, I thought. And then I'd started crying. Now I was done. My guilt and self-loathing were eating away at me. Guilt that I'd worried Tucker so much. Self-loathing that I'd driven him away after only a week. That was a personal best for me. All behold the amazing freak that is Nikki Lorenz. She who can send men running in days. Give me time and I could probably lower my time to mere hours. But this was all about the mourning and wallowing, and I knew I couldn't do it forever. Eventually my mom and Hermes would come, at least I assumed they would. But despite all evidence to the contrary, I wasn't quite ready to throw in the towel to that degree. I got out of bed creaky and stiff, completely like the Tin Man from The Wizard of Oz before his oil can. It was as if moving at all cost me everything, but I managed to drag myself to the bathroom and get to the sink. Standing before it, I reached down and splashed water on my face. It felt good, cool, and that at least centered me. My eyes were red and slightly swollen. I figured that was what almost an hour of crying did to you. It wasn't just Tucker I'd cried for. It was so many other things, too. I wasn't a good enough designer no matter what I did, and I wasn't the right kind of daughter. Not even close. So far, I'd lived up to my reputation as the family embarrassment and done nothing to live up to the promise of my early buzz and designs. And you know what? It wasn't all my mother's fault. I'd blame my mom in so many ways since I was a teenager for always being gone and then for never seeming to care. I was angry at her for always digging hardest at my designs and my efforts, and most especially for blaming me for my father's death. Maybe I was over-designing and creating the extreme looks in part to spite her. Maybe with every bizarre piece of so-called art and every spiraling high heel, I was sticking it to my mother. Except I was 27 now, and it was time to get over it. Maybe we'd never be more than acquaintances. Maybe I'd have to endure her condescension and bitterness for the rest of my life, and those awful jabs that cut into me more than any knife could have. But I couldn't keep blaming her for everything. I'd made so many bad decisions all on my own, including climbing on balconies and bridges. And maybe it was the loss of him that made me hear Tucker's words about getting help. But I finally heard them. I was going to call a counselor and at least try to get my head on straight. Except for the battle scar on my calf, I was unmarred, but inside I was a mass of scars and hurt, of pulsating pain seeking to push everyone else away. But I already knew it didn't always have to be this way, because Tucker had broken through my pain and made me feel good about myself. He'd believed in me. That proved I could do better, and I would do better. I strode out of the bathroom and got dressed in my red dress because I hadn't bothered to pick up any new clothes before checking in. As I slid it on, the garment felt different today, as if the dress was a costume. It was gorgeous. There was no doubt of that. It was worth every bit of the $3,000 I'd paid for it, but it felt like exactly what it was: dress up. It was all about the scared little girl trying to exude the confidence she'd never really felt. I was surprised that Tucker had liked me in the look as much as he had. Couldn't he see what a ruse it all was? But things could no longer be just about Tucker. He deserved far, far better than me. He didn't need to be the fireman rushing in to save me every time I set my life on fire, which seemed to be every day with me. I wished we could be together because I really believed I was halfway in love with him. That maybe if I weren't such a mess, he could learn to love me back. "You have to love yourself first," I said out loud. I couldn't get a guy to fix me, even if poor Tucker had tried, and even if Hermes was still up for the job. I had to work on me, on liking myself, on figuring out who I really was, when I wasn't trying to win the approval of others. Starting with footwear. It all led back to shoes, didn't it? There was no way I was putting on those ridiculous gladiator heels. It was crazy. I mean, no freaking wonder all the magazines and critics had panned my stuff. They were nuts, and they were uncomfortable. For the first time in years, it was like I was actually seeing my designs for what they were. That giant middle finger to the fashion establishment, especially Anna Lorenz. But that wasn't fun for anyone. It wasn't something the rest of the fashion world could dig, and frankly, having worn them for a few years, they weren't anything a normal woman could actually wear out to work or on a date. I needed to go all the way back to the drawing board. Shaking my head, I rummaged around the suite until I found my cell phone. My show was in a few days, but I needed to get an extension as long as I could, until the last day of the 2-week event. I had a plan, but I'd be working around the clock to pull it all off now. "Hello, Hermes?" "Thank God, Dominique. Where have you been? Are you all right? What were you thinking?" "Nothing good," I muttered. "But I'm fine," I said, stopping him from getting into things more deeply. "I'm working through everything, but I do have something huge I need. I want my show moved to the last slot. You know that's highly unusual, but not impossible." "Of course, but if this is all so you can go on another bender with that rock star of yours, I'm not going to sign off on it." "We broke up, Hermes. This isn't about him." Hermes perked up at that. "That was wise of you, Dominique." "It was the best thing for him, but as for my show, I need a little more time." "For what?" "To grow up. I'm going to show the shoes I want to, the ones I was too scared to display before. If this is the only solo show I get in Paris, I'm going to be honest about my art. Will you help me?" After only a slight hesitation, Hermes said, "I will." "Then let's get to work." Chapter 19. Nikki. "I don't understand, mademoiselle," Cristobal asked. He was a chubby man with thinning gray hair and a distinguished mustache. He was also one of the best leather sewers in the industry. I might come up with designs, but he and his team were the ones who created my vision. They'd worked for months on my line for my show, but now Hermes had pulled every string he could and had succeeded in moving my show to the last slot of the fashion event. I had to hope it would buy me enough time. Based on the bugged-out eyes that Cristobal was giving me, maybe I was asking for the impossible. Too bad cobbler's elves weren't real, because I could really use some right now. No, you heard me right. I know it sounds impossible, but I've had a complete revelation about my line. If you can only get 10 new designs ready with all your assistants, that's fine. These are the 10 that will be the cornerstone of my show. But we've been working on dozens of designs for months, he pointed out, as if we hadn't been working on those lines together, cheek by jowl. Maybe he thought I'd gone nuts. I couldn't blame him. Maybe I had. It wasn't just unorthodox. What I was asking should be impossible, but succeeding in getting my show pushed out was a good sign. I had to change my life, and that meant pursuing what I'd once loved, designing shoes in a way that was right for me. And what better way to do that than putting it all out there for the critics, including my mom, to see. I was going to do the designs I actually loved, using years' worth of sketches I had shoved into drawers for too long because I was afraid they wouldn't fit with my brand. I think I can call in some extra help for the week. It will be horrendously costly, and we can't get through more than 8. I need all 10. Cristobal bit his lower lip and frowned back at me. I'll get you 10, but only because these designs are excellent and the best anyone's brought me in ages. I've longed to make bold yet classic designs again. You're not the only trendsetter out there who has made me sew things I hated. Ouch, I said, giggling a little and tossing my red hair over my shoulder. I'll try not to take offense at that. You shouldn't, because I'm excited about your masterpieces here. I will do my best, Dominique. I'm honored you brought your Renaissance to me. In fact, my cell started blaring then, and I had to grab it fast out of my purse. I frowned apologetically at him. I had to check in case it was one of the millions of other assistants or vendors that I was working with for my show. Also, I'd promised a still extremely freaked out Hermes that I'd answer as soon as he called. He was still upset with me for what I'd pulled at the Eiffel Tower, and I could understand that. However, my heart started beating faster when I saw who was actually on the other end. Tucker Benning. He'd been back in New York for a few days. I knew that because I'd seen a photo of him in Central Park, taken with his friend Liam on the internet. Seeing it, knowing that he was now thousands of miles away from me, had been a punch in the gut. I'd almost been laid low again, but I'd pulled myself together. But why was he calling me now? To check in, probably. Because Tucker Benning might be a cocky rock star, but he was also a sweet, caring man. It would be the right thing to do. Call on crazy Nikki Lorenz and make sure she was doing okay. I was, or at least I would be, and he needed to get on with his life. I had to let him off the hook so he could put my cray-cray behind him. Frowning apologetically at Cristobal, I held up my index finger. I'm really sorry. Can you give me about 5 minutes? I just need to take this call. I'm truly sorry. I didn't have the heart to screen out Tucker and focus on work entirely. I was terrified if I didn't answer that he'd take my actions as a slight on him, like I blamed him somehow when I don't. I was finally taking full responsibility, and I needed to keep doing it. Cristobal nodded and started eyeing my designs more thoroughly. Of course, you're the client after all, mademoiselle. I nodded and hurried back to the entry hall and away from prying ears. Hey, it's me, I said once I clicked on the line. I hope he didn't change his mind just hearing my voice and then hung up on me. You did want to reach me, right? I'm not making you feel like this was all a mistake already. Tucker laughed. It was a little bit more than a forced, polite laugh, but not by much. Nick, it's good to hear your voice. Why? I blurted, even as I closed my eyes and wanted to slam my forehead against a wall. I wasn't being smooth in the least. I mean, I didn't expect to hear from you. I wouldn't have blamed you if you never called me again. I wouldn't have called me again. Look, let me talk. I have to get this out first, he said, and his tone was kind and soft. I was wrong to leave. What? I asked, not even sure I'd heard him correctly. Maybe I was having some weird hallucination or seizure. Everything he was saying was far more than I deserved, especially after how much I'd whipped him back and forth and confused them. I don't understand. Look, I was hurt and upset and confused. Otherwise, I never would have let you walk out of my hotel room. I never would have gotten on a plane to New York. I'm here now, but I miss you. I miss you so much. I miss you too, I whispered, blinking fast to hold back my tears. Yeah, because, well, I talked to Liam. I told him my concerns, that I want to write songs, that I want to sing, and he's on board. You helped me gather the courage to do that, Nikki. That's not true. You would have done it eventually. You go after what you want, Tucker, even if you sometimes falter. As soon as I said the words, I held my breath. Then he said, I want you, Nikki. I want to come back to you. I'm going to buy a ticket back to Paris, and then we can talk, okay? For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. I felt hot tears sting my cheeks, and I couldn't believe any of this was happening. It was everything I'd wanted. Someone stable and kind who loved me, who really supported me. And even though Tucker hadn't said he loved me, that's how I interpreted what he was saying. Tucker was the first good guy I'd had in my life who seemed to believe in me. But he deserved better. I'd realized that the morning I'd stumbled out of his hotel room, and hearing the warmth and genuine concern in his voice, even after all I'd put him through, just confirmed it. You don't have to come back, Tucker. Not right now. Nick, you don't need to test me. I'm coming back, I promise. No, you were right. You were the dose of truth and tough love I needed. You made a great point. I need to get help. I have a lot of issues that I haven't been dealing with. But I will. First, I'm redoing my show. I pushed it to the very last possible slot at the fashion event. I don't want to be Dominique Lorenz, designer out to shock. I want to be Nikki, and I want to create the fashions I really care about. The classic lines and the substance with the pizzazz and the flair. That's great, but we can still be together. No, Tucker, not yet. I need to get help first. Maybe then I'll deserve you. I hope you'll wait for me, that you'll want to be with me when I'm better. But I'm so lost, and I need to find myself again before I can be anything for you. Who I find might not be who you want, so you don't have to make any promises until you meet the best possible me I can be. He laughed again. If you're willing to get help, then you're already the best possible you, Nikki. I'll wait as long as you need me to. I hope so. The life of a rock star was far more fast-paced and exciting than even that of a designer. Tucker really could mean that he'd wait for me, but then in a month or two, he could be in Prague or Vienna or London and see an adoring fan and start thinking, Nikki who? But I had to get better for myself. There was no question I loved Tucker now. I was going to work on loving me. Au revoir, Tucker. I hope I'll see you soon. Nikki, wait. I clicked off the call. I didn't have the strength to stay on the line. If I did talk for any longer, I was positive that I was going to break down and beg him to come back to Paris. I had to be strong. But I also had an idea. Something that would give Tucker a little piece of me while he waited for me to get better. Something to show just how much hope and strength he'd given me. It didn't matter whether my show flopped or the critics loved me. Either way, I'd be okay. Shoving my phone in my pants pocket, I rushed into Cristobal's main office. I was going to add a few designs to Cristobal's workload. Designs for the man who'd inspired me. Tucker. Chapter 20. Tucker. After talking to Nikki, I spent over a week in New York. Longer than I'd intended, because Wes and Corbin had come for a visit. But in between rebonding with my bandmates, I kept up with news about Nikki, and there was plenty of it. Sites mentioned how wild child Nikki Lorenz had moved her show to the absolute last spot of the Paris fashion event. Many made snide digs, saying she'd gotten cold feet or had messed up in some way. But I knew what she was planning. Nikki was going to buck all the pressure she'd been under and abandon all the extreme designs, or most of them. She needed all the time she could get if she was going to get her best stuff up and ready for the show. 2 days ago, she'd sent a special package to me in New York. Actually, she'd sent quite a few. When I opened the first box, I was excited to see motorcycle boots. But she hadn't stopped there. I don't know how she'd done it or how many cobbler elves she had to bribe to help her with everything, but she'd sent an array of shoes and boots, from motorcycle to casual to dressy. They were awesome, everything I knew Nick was capable of. I was wearing them now because I was so proud of her. I was also done listening to her. Since I left Paris, there'd been an emptiness inside me that I just couldn't stand any longer. Nikki had told me to wait until she was her best self before I came to her, but I was done waiting. I'd never be my best self. Neither would she. The point was, when we were together, we at least had our best shot, which is why I was currently back in the City of Lights. I exited my cab, which I'd taken from the fancy hotel me, the boys, and Abby had checked into. When I told them I was headed here, they'd all gotten it into their heads that they had to come too. They wanted to meet Nikki, and I didn't even argue with them, because I wanted that too. I strolled into the warehouse space that Nikki had been working in since she'd arrived in Paris. Since her show was only a day away now, I expected to see her scurrying about in every corner, with dark circles under her eyes and tons of assistants hunched over racks organizing and labeling shoes. That's not what I found, and it made my blood run cold. Hermes was sitting at a desk in the far corner of the quiet and eerily abandoned workspace. In his hand was a tumbler of scotch. "What happened?" "Tucker," he said, his voice low and menacing. "She was doing so well before you came into her life." "I didn't say she wasn't," I replied, holding my hands up and trying to show him that I was on everyone's side. I just wanted to help Nikki, and the last thing I expected was to walk into her shop and have it look like it was closed for business. "But I'm not the bad guy you think I am either, Herm." He stood then, and maybe I needed to watch my mouth, at least a little bit. He was taller than I realized, maybe close to 6'5", and I glared back at him. I'd had more than my share of fights out on the strip, and I kind of liked the idea of seeing Hermes with a split lip or spitting out some teeth. Anything to make him less coiffed and in control. "It's Hermes," he said, crossing his arms over his barrel chest. "Before arriving here, she was on the right track and being responsible. Then you show up, and she starts trying to throw herself off the Eiffel Tower and crowd surfing while drunk at Sacre Bleu. I can't help but think you're exactly what sent her over the edge." I balled my right hand into a fist at my side. "I wasn't all of it. I tried to help her, which is more than I can say for that ice queen that she calls a mother." Hermes relaxed and took a few steps back. "Anna hired me, but I can't agree more. My loyalties lie with Dominique and always have. I want to keep her safe." "You care more than the usual minder or babysitter, don't you?" I asked. "This isn't just about a paycheck. There would be easier jobs to take than looking after Nick, and we both know it." He nodded. "I do care about her, and she knows that. I wanted more from her, but she turned me down. I've never seen Dominique care about someone the way she does about you. I'd hate you for that if it didn't matter so much to me that she'd be happy. That's what I really want for her." "Then why is everything like a ghost town? This is nuts. I know she's been revamping her designs. She even sent me some great boots from her new line. How did we go from that to you basically hunched over in a dark room and drinking pain into your liver? You're not exactly delicate with your sentiments, are you, Mr. Bennington?" It's corrected. It's hard not to know that when Point Break is one of the biggest bands on the planet right now. "Oh, so you're not breaking up? I suppose I heard wrong." "Yes, I'm sure you're super upset about that, Mr. Salt and Pepper." He gave me a wry grin. "I might feel I had more of a chance if you were no longer a rock god, yes." "Or maybe she's not into dating someone her dad's age," I huffed. "Seriously, I talked to Nikki not too long ago, and she seemed fine. She was adamant that she'd be going to therapy after this." "I know, that's why I finally told her mother that I quit. She's the reason for all this." "Anna?" I asked, balling my hands up at my sides again. I know that hitting a woman is completely off the table, and I've never been that guy. Still, I was sick of seeing how much Nikki's mom was ruining her. Couldn't we just have her locked up already? How could her constant jabs, even if Nick was 27, be seen as anything other than child abuse? Yes, her mother was on a tear. She came in a few days ago and yelled at Dominique over changing her date, and all the criticism that Anna's been getting on her so-called wayward daughter. Then she insulted her mundane and pedestrian new designs. Nikki was bereft. After her mother left, she threatened to call off the show, but she settled for scrapping the new designs. She's going back to the extreme look, since that's what everyone expects of her. She undid everything. I saw the work that Dominique's done, and I watched how hard her people have worked. The shoes would have been wonderful, he said, gesturing to the boots on my feet. But you already know that. She rushed to get your shoes done first, would barely have had time to finish the shoes for the show. But as it is now, they're not done. They can't be at this point. Wait a minute, I said, snapping my fingers. I've got it. Got what? Gotten on my last nerve? Hermes snapped. No, I have an idea to help with Nikki's show. Maybe there's not enough time to finish all her shoes for the show, but there's time to finish a few, isn't there? Possibly, Hermes said with a frown. Hermes, if you care about Nikki like you say you do, I need the number for the shoe sewers. Cobblers? Same thing, whatever. But I have a big plan, And Nikki's show is going on, and it's going to be awesome. There's nothing all three of us want more than to shove it to her mother. So get me whatever cobbler stuff I need, and tell me if Nick's back at her place. I'm going to save the day here, Herm." He rolled his eyes, but handed me a few business cards. "These are the best cobblers and leathersmiths in the city. If you need to convince them, tell them the favor is for me, and I'll pay them back. I don't like you." "No, really?" I asked, taking the cards from him. "Guess you can tell that the feeling is mutual." "Indeed, but if you can really help, Dominique, then I hope your plans work, Tucker. They're our best hope." Chapter 21. Nikki. I felt gutted. I was sitting in my dressing room and counting down less than 2 hours to go before my first, and probably last, solo show in Paris was set to debut. The last few days had been a total whirlwind. After my mother had snuck into my shop to scream at me about how embarrassing it was for her that I delayed my show, I tried so hard to figure out why she'd always disapproved of me. It wasn't just about my dad. She'd treated me poorly for years before that. It had probably started in the womb because I'd caused her to gain weight. As a child, I'd been too loud and too messy. As a teen, I always put too much on my plate at brunches and fancy dinners. Then, after I'd become a wild child, that had been easy. I'd been a disgrace. Now I was past 27 and nothing had changed. She couldn't see, or maybe she didn't want to see, that I wasn't that same rebellious girl. I'd met what I said to Tucker, even with this setback. I was still going to get help, but I'd stupidly stopped production on my new designs, and even if I hadn't, I no longer felt confident about them. I just had to get through this show, and that meant using my old designs. Maybe it was for the best. Well-made leather boots or heels handcrafted with love and the best of materials just wouldn't grab headlines and attention like the sky-high platforms and other things I designed. But after the show, I'd be heading back to the States, and I'd be doing it after I cut ties with my mother. All I wanted was to never deal with her again. If that put me in some self-styled boutique in the middle of nowhere in the United States, just me in my own small shop outside of the spotlight, then so be it. I'd do it while pursuing therapy and getting healthier. There was something so appealing as I imagined it. Feeling good about myself and living a quiet and manageable life creating fashions that I loved. And hopefully being with a man I loved who loved me back. Maybe even Tucker. If he even wants to see me, I said miserably to my own reflection. I looked bad. I was pale as a sheet, and there were huge dark circles under my bloodshot eyes. I hadn't slept since Mother had stormed in on me. Any time I tried to close my eyes, I just saw our confrontation play out over and over on a loop. I can't even understand what Tucker sees in me. "Are you serious?" A familiar voice asked, and I turned around in my seat. It took several seconds for my shock to wear off. Then I broke into a wide grin. I couldn't help myself, no matter how pathetic it made me. I ran toward him and jumped, wrapping my arms and legs around him. We kissed. "You're really here?" "Of course," he said. "Why wouldn't I come and see your show?" "Because I told you to stay away." He lowered me to my feet. "But you really didn't want me to stay away. I knew it, and I didn't want to stay away either." He hesitated then and stroked my cheek. I loved the feel of his skin, slightly calloused and blistered from years of drumsticks in his hands, against the side of my face. "Hermes told me what happened. I'm sorry about your mom, but you can't give up on your new designs, Princess." "I have to. My mom's right. They are too ordinary. And even if they aren't—" I hated the desperation and resignation in my voice. I wanted to be a fighter, but I'd made fighting a difficult prospect. I did something foolish again. I stopped production on the new designs. I acted like a child again, a scared child. It doesn't matter how hard I try to get a handle on myself or my life. My mom can make me feel 5 years old again and scared, shaking in my closet. She'll always have that power over me. "No, she won't. You just haven't had the practice to see that. But you're the strongest person I know, Nick, and I've missed you so much." I couldn't stop the feelings flowing through me any longer, and I didn't want to. "You're incredible," I said. "You came back for me, and I didn't give you a single reason to." Tucker grinned, a look that was all too at home on his chiseled features. "You're all the reason I need. Just you. That will always be enough. Now about your show." "Are you kidding? I don't want to talk about my show right now." I mock pouted. You said you missed me." "I have," he purred, kissing his way down my throat and nibbling at my earlobes. "Then show me, right here, please." When things were calm again, I said, "I'm so glad you're here, Tucker. I'm just sorry you're about to be dating the worst shoe designer in Paris." His arm squeezed me tight before he gently turned my face towards him. His expression was both fierce and tender. "You're not, and I'm going to prove it." "What do you mean?" "I have plans and reinforcements." That confused me. Sitting up, I stared back into those soft green eyes. "Huh?" "You sent me several pairs of great shoes. You're lucky that my friends basically have the same large shoe size. Now you have the world's hottest band and awesome shoes that need to be modeled. So let Point Break do that for you." My heart was thumping hard at what he was saying. It was all about the surprise. If his band modeled for me with the real designs I loved, even if they were men's shoes, then it would get attention. I was terrified Mother was right and the shoes were too pedestrian, but Tucker was willing to call out the reserves just for me. "They're here?" "They wanted to meet you, and they'd all love to help. I also had Hermes give me Cristobal's number, plus a few other contacts. He's been working on getting a few of your newer shoe designs finished, and I figured if we threw in a couple of your older designs too." My eyes bugged out. "Hermes gave you some of his contacts? He helped you? Why?" "Because, as much as it galls me to say it, the guy really cares about you, Nikki. Thanks for shooting him down, by the way." I laughed. "You're welcome." "Anyway, I have more than one trick up my sleeve, Nick, and now we're going to show the world who you really are." I snorted, all my self-hate bubbling up to the surface. "You mean the crazy brat? The unstable hack? I know who I am." "No, you're a flawed but amazing woman. You're real. You're also a great designer," he said, gesturing to the boots he still wore, the biker boots I'd made specifically for him in mind, with just enough spikes and metal accents to add some danger to his look. "It's time the world sees exactly what I see." "Then I'm all for it," I said, hopping up and shoving my clothes on. "I can't believe how lucky I am. You all have massive feet." "Don't let it give you the wrong idea. No matter what they say about guys and big feet, the other guys have nothing on me." "I'll take your word for it. I just can't believe you're here, and you're going to do this for me." "I'm Tucker Benning, baby. Believe it." Chapter 22. Tucker. Liam was grinning back at me, even as I adjusted his Armani suit. "Tucker, when you talk people into stuff, you really don't go halfway, do you?" I laughed and rolled my eyes. "Don't tell Nikki this, but there was a girl I used to date way back when, who is now a top assistant to Armani. I begged her for serious help, something awesome to go with all the hot boots and other stuff Nikki made. I figured the cross-marketing and getting some huge-name designer to be involved in the show wouldn't hurt. You need to start using those good marketing ideas for us, buddy." "No, now that we're not going on a huge hiatus, we're going to be fine. Besides, maybe I need a lot more motivation to be this genius. Like with that half-finished song you played for us? You have something good there, something that I think a certain redhead designer might inspire you to finish." "That's true," I admitted, but then I shrugged. "I know what words I want, almost, but I'm not sure I can figure out the melody that really matches. Let me help you on that end. I think Abby and I can both help you get that soft sound you need to bring your ballad home." I nodded and clapped my hand on his shoulder. "Thanks, man," I said before straightening out my own charcoal gray suit in the mirror. The boots I have on look like those fancy riding boots you might see a horseback rider wear. They're high-polished black leather and highlighted with just 2 silver buttons, one on each heel. They run up to my knees but fit great under the legs of the suit. I know I look good, but I'm nervous in a lot of other ways. I'm the guy who bangs on the drums. That's always been my job. I'm at home in a club or in the middle of a stadium, but I'm not some pinup guy for GQ. According to Wes, who'd done a few small modeling jobs in LA, the best approach was to not think about it at all. Maybe just walk more slowly than usual so people get a good look at the shoes they need to see. I tried to strut or practice like a model with the guys, and everyone, especially Wes, doubled over laughing. I think I look like some weird whooping crane, stepping all weird and exaggerated. But I didn't care. I was doing this for Nikki. I pulled out my phone and got it ready for a picture. "Hey, Liam, get in frame and get ready to tweet this baby out." He sidled up next to me, his boots a bit more biker-friendly, with chrome accents that complemented his red silk shirt. We both grinned and posed for the selfie. It didn't take long for me to get it up on Twitter and Instagram. Between just the two of us, we had 30 million Twitter followers and even more on Instagram. Smirking to myself, I added a caption. "What am I about to do? #Paris fashion, #Lorenz rocks." And then I posted everything on Instagram. It wouldn't take long for rumors to spread and for every available paparazzi member to be here. Good. Point Break was going to rock this town, even if it would be in a different way than we usually did. The more press, the better, because then everyone would see what I already had, that Nikki was a talented designer. The first 5 or so models out on the runway were real models, guys and girls who were wearing the few extreme designs that Nikki actually still liked, as well as the newer designs her team had managed to finish. But soon the techno gave way to the blaring bass of one of our biggest hits, the first hint that Point Break was involved with the show. It was now or never, and all I had to do was hope I didn't trip. The crowd got onto its feet the minute I stepped out onto the runway and the announcer said my name and Point Break. He then launched into a description of the borrowed Armani suit and the boots. I got down to the edge of the catwalk and took off my jacket, slinging it over my shoulder before gazing out to the crowd. They were giving me a standing ovation. I wanted to grin, but I kept my fashion-forward pout on my face instead. For Nikki. Chapter 23. Nikki. I couldn't believe everything I was reading. After my insane high-energy designs had been criticized all over town after the shows they guest starred in, now every outlet I could find was raving about my back-to-basics approach. Sure, everywhere from Vogue to GQ had to mention first that it was the surprise of Paris and of the fashion community to have the world's hottest band channel their inner model for the night. Still, once the sensational part was through, every single piece praised my designs, old and new, as well as the quality of the workmanship, the love for classic lines, and the inclusion of shoes that were bringing high fashion back to the average man. I'd never been this praised before. I'd been called daring or bold, or had people expound on the merits of the riots of colors and geometric play involved in my wildest designs. But this was different. This wasn't about the shock and awe of whatever my mind could come up with. No, this was how I'd emerged as a real craftswoman, as someone with an eye for design and for fashion history. It was about my ability to take the old, add my own spin, and bring classical sexy back. After the show, I had a whirlwind of interviews. At first, Tucker and I were standing side by side for them, but then he'd regrouped with the band. Eventually, we'd been swept to different sides of the backstage area. I must have talked for 3 or 4 hours, and I only stopped when my voice was hoarse. To his credit, Hermes had been a good babysitter. He'd helped hand out cards and promised to coordinate further press inquiries with the proper outlets. Eventually, he'd arranged for me to slip back to my suite so I could get myself the biggest possible mug of tea I could hold while I perused the fashion blogs, Google, and Twitter for mentions of my show. My name was 10th on worldwide trends for a while, but it couldn't compete with all the tweets about Tucker Benning and Point Break. When my boy wanted to make a huge statement, he definitely had a direct plan on how to make it work. I was perusing one of those blogs, a smaller one that was full of snark, called "You're Really Wearing That?" But they also had a knack for capturing the best pictures of any event they covered. This time was no exception. They'd gotten a candid of me and Tucker in mid-kiss, and we looked so happy and cute together. Strong hands massaged my back and shoulders, and I grinned. "Tucker, that better be you." Soft lips caressed my neck. "Oh, you better believe it, Nick. I'm sorry I'm late. After the show, the guys wanted to coordinate the times for practice tomorrow." "That's okay," I croaked out, still aware that I was beyond hoarse currently. "I've been decompressing." "And possibly bathing in your own glory," he added, sliding down beside me in bed. "But that's a great pic. We should print it." I grinned back at him. "We do look pretty cute together." "Yeah, I imagine we'd have cute babies." I gaped back at him, unsure I'd heard that part right. He couldn't be serious. It was still hard for me to believe Tucker wanted me at all, let alone to be the mother of his children. Plus, dating was one thing, but to even be thinking of marriage and kids at this point, it was crazy. "Did I say something wrong?" he asked, arching an eyebrow at me. "No, you just mentioned babies, and I know you didn't mean anything by it, but—" "Why didn't I mean anything? I mean, not now. Maybe not any time soon. But assuming we both continue to grow and become even more fantastic than we already are." I felt tears welling in my eyes again. "You really see that as a possibility?" "More than a possibility. It's my endgame," he said, taking my chin in his hands. "I want to do the whole 9 yards. Date for a long time, have fabulous and wild fun, get married, and have more fun. Eventually, I figure little rockers and fashion designers will come from that. But I'm getting the help you need, and I'll be with you every step of the way. That's all you need to remember," he said. "Now, can I have some private time with my girl?" "Yes, please." "I can't wait for us to set the world on fire. Together, Nikki." "Together," I echoed. Epilogue. Tucker. The lights came up, and I started to run my hands over the keys of the piano. Drums had always been my thing, but as I'd worked with Abby and Liam to perfect Nikki's ballad, I'd wanted to be responsible for more than the backbeat. So I'd learned some piano. It wasn't like I was going to be playing at Carnegie Hall anytime soon, but it was a new skill, one I'd learned for Nick, but also for myself, to be a better musician, and a better man. Nikki made me want to be better, period. I still loved to have fun, that hadn't changed, but I was no longer the Tucker Benning who'd arrived in Paris over a year ago. I didn't miss partying, and as for the groupies, none of the wild experiences I'd had before held a candle to the connection and sheer pleasure I felt when Nikki was in my arms. So as my fingers traveled over the keys, playing out a haunting melody, which Abby was matching expertly on the cello, I let my feelings out and hoped that the new song I'd composed for Nikki would mean as much to her as it did to me. "They say you're broken, but I know you're more. They say you're trouble, but I know you'll soar. They told me not to bother, but they don't know my soul. Forget trouble with your mother. Now you're out on your own. You're scared all the time, but I know you wouldn't be if you could only understand all the things about you I see. You're the diamond in the night sky, the roar of the ocean too. You're the woman I love, and there's no one else but you." I started playing the bridge, concentrating hard. I had practiced this song hundreds of times, and even played it on our newest album. We could have ordered a studio musician for it, but I'd rejected that idea from the start. Nikki needed to know how sincere I was, how important she was to me, but that knowledge didn't make me any less nervous as I kept playing. Sure, I'd mess up, hit a flat note, and ruin the ballad for all of us. Finally, the instrumental part was done after another flourish from Abby on backup. I was able to finish out the chorus then, twice more, promising with all my heart that there'd never be another woman besides Nikki. After all, if you had the best, then what was the point of anyone else? There was no one out there like her, and with the help of her therapist, she was finally beginning to understand and value her own worth. Nikki hadn't so much as emailed her mother in a year. Part of me was glad. Nikki needed her time. We needed our time. But someday I hoped her mom would come around, that she'd realize how special and talented her daughter was. It was something the rest of the world already knew. Nikki's shoes were a wild success, most especially her men's line. However, she'd kept a few of her styles exclusive for Point Break. As a nice bonus, any band that toured as our warm-up act was allowed to have some basic biker boots. Sometimes we joked that our opening acts wanted Nikki's boots more than they actually wanted the thrill of playing with Point Break. My girl was a star, and if she shined brighter than me, I was all for it. I loved her, and I needed her as much as she needed me. As I made my way backstage to meet her, I just hoped she'd like the song. I knew I had nothing to worry about the second I saw her. She broke into a wide grin when I stepped off the stage and then rushed out to hug me. I swept her up in my arms and spun her around, planting my nose in her shock of auburn hair. She was as gorgeous as she'd ever been and was wearing a tight black leather dress. Even as she was getting healthier, that didn't mean she'd retired her wild side completely. She still looked amazing in leather. "I loved your song," she said, pulling back and grinning up at me. I narrowed my eyes. Her eyes looked a little red and shiny, like she'd been crying. But at the same time, her love for me blazed bright. But surprisingly, I found myself still needing some reassurance. "Are you sure? I think maybe my piano solo is a bit too long." "It's not. What? It made me fly, every second of it." "And Princess," I said, and I couldn't keep myself from smirking, "I don't think it's long enough, because you know that's what I live for, making you fly for me." I pulled her more tightly into my arms and kissed her, tasting the mint and soda on her breath. It was delightfully sweet. "Why, Tucker Benning, you're such a naughty boy." "Always with you, Nikki, but only in the best ways possible." "I can't wait for tomorrow, Tucker, and everything it might bring. I hope it'll bring more love songs, too." I laughed and kissed her once more. "I can guarantee it, Princess. Today, tomorrow, and always." This has been Taming the Rock Star, Rock Candy Series Book 2 by Virna De Paul, narrated by Christina Renault. Copyright 2016 by Virna De Paul. Production copyright 2023 by Virna De Paul.